streamed at boston.gov/city-council-tv. It will be rebroadcast on Comcast Channel 8, RCN Channel 82, and Verizon Channel 1964. Obviously, because of the public health emergency, we are conducting this hearing over Zoom in line with the permission from the governor. The council, we've also just been joined by Council President Kim Janey from District 7. The council's FY21 budget review process will encompass about 27 hearings over roughly 6 weeks, as well as 9 working sessions. Some of those will pertain to BPS, like today's, and then some to other departments. We strongly encourage residents to take a moment to engage in this process by giving testimony for the record. So you can do that in one of several ways. You can attend one of these virtual hearings and give public testimony. We'll take public testimony at the end of the hearing. When you are called, we ask that you state your name and affiliation or residence and limit your comments to a few minutes to ensure that all comments and concerns can be heard. We also ask folks in joining the Zoom to use their proper name so that we know who's in the waiting room. Just want to note that the Zoom link can be found on a public notice for each of these hearings. When you are in the waiting room until the end of the hearing, you won't be able to watch the hearing through the Zoom. You need to do that on the City Council TV link. Members of the public are also welcome to our dedicated public testimony hearings, the first one of which will actually be this Thursday at 6 p.m. There'll be a hearing really focused on what your budget questions are and what your concerns are that you want the council to take up over this 2-month process. So again, we hope people will join us for that 6 p.m. Hearing this Thursday, and then there will be 2 further dedicated public testimony hearings more toward the end of the process. You can also email the committee at ccc.wm@boston.gov or fill out the form on our website. And there's also a way through that form or through email to submit a 2-minute video of your testimony if you would like to speak in person that way. You can also informally tweet us your questions using the hashtag BOSBudget, Boss Budget. My staff will be monitoring that. And for more information on the City Council budget process and how to testify, we ask that you visit the City Council's budget website, which is at boston.gov/council-FY21 budget. And you can read the proposed budget at budget.boston.gov. So now moving to today's hearing. Today's hearing is on docket 0588 to 0590, orders for the FY21 operating budget, including annual appropriations for departmental operations, for the school department, and for other post-employment benefits. Docket 0591, 0592, orders for capital fund transfer appropriations, and docket 0593 to 0596, orders for the capital budget, including loan orders and lease purchase agreements. Our focus today will be on the Boston Public Schools. We'll be getting a budget overview presentation from the superintendent and her staff. And our expected speakers are Superintendent Brenda Cassellius, Charles Grenson, the Chief Equity and Strategy Officer for BPS, Nate Cooter, Chief Financial Officer, and David Bloom, Deputy Chief Financial Officer. So we'll start with a presentation from the superintendent and her staff, and then move to counselor questions. There will be a series of BPS-related hearings throughout this process. This is the first one in the overview, and I should also note represents the first moment of the council taking up the BPS budget, which has already been through a school committee process over the prior months. So with that, I'd like to recognize Dr. Brenda Cassellius.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, members, for having us today. I'm so excited today to present, in partnership with our Chief Financial Officer, Nate Cooter, our 21-22 school budget, or 2021 school budget. We have been engaged in a number of reviews, both from the state review, my own personal review, and also really gathering all kinds of feedback to begin to do some intensive strategic planning for the next 5 years of the Boston Public Schools. And then, of course, in this unprecedented time that we have in the context of this COVID crisis, just very much thinking about the inequities that exist within our communities, and then also are reflective within our school, and the sharp focus that we place in this budget on equity, and the sharp focus that we are going to be placing on key areas that will be supporting of our children and their families, supporting of our strategic direction around the academic improvement of our children, as well as the organization itself and the improvements that are needed there. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and get started. I want to thank Charles Grant, Dr. Granson, for his incredible work in putting together our strategic plan over these last several months, as well as the school committee and Chairman Mike Lecanto and all of the members who deliberated on this strategic plan, and the entire executive team at the Boston Public Schools who contributed, and their teams worked diligently in putting this together. So I'm going to highlight very quickly for you, because I have already shared with you much of the strategic direction that we hope to have in our engagement process. Then I will highlight quickly for you some of the review from the state DESE report, and some of those highlights are SOA, Student Opportunity Act work that we are engaged in right now for the 1.8 million that came from that appropriation and requirement, moving then into the actual budget request that we are making of the city. I cannot thank Mayor Welsh enough for his belief in our capacity at the Boston Public Schools to deliver on the strategic plan, and his 3-year commitment of $100 million to be able to see it actualized. I've often been quoted as saying, we usually end up for school improvement with year-to-year budgets, but knowing that we have a 3-year commitment from the mayor to prioritize our children and their families in this incredible work that we have ahead of us, really does present an opportunity for us to go deeper in the work and to really create a strong foundation for school improvement over time rather than year to year. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and get started. Nate, want to flip? So as I mentioned, we have the superintendent's tour, which I had made some very ambitious goals of meeting and going to all 125 school buildings. It was an incredible opportunity to go and visit all schools, and students toured me around, and I got a chance to hear directly from students, engage with parents and families, and also our teachers and school leaders and support staff in each of those schools to find out what really they needed to be able to do improvement. It also gave me a really good sense of Boston, being an outsider and being able to come in and quickly learn the city and quickly learn the neighborhoods. So that was a huge benefit to be able to have that information as we begin to think about these very important decisions before us. Then we got formal feedback on the plan. We had a 30-day review and comment. We had several opportunities to present to the school committee, as well as held many outside town hall meetings, parent council meetings, meetings with specialized interest groups throughout all of this process. And so that then led to really the key indicators within the strategic plan. Thirdly, our school district was under review from the State Department. It was a regular review that they do of school districts. We hadn't had one, I understand, for many, many years. And so it was time to do one. And there was a lot of good information that came from that review for us, mostly around issues of leadership and governance, curriculum, data and assessment, looking at the district offices and central office, how we are doing student learning and interventions for special populations, and then some of our operational work. And so some of that feedback came back and was very informative in terms of the development of the strategic direction, and then that informs then this budget and what we are looking to do. So really what I'm trying to show here in this slide is the complete alignment of all of those factors and reviews and that have gone into the decisions around what direction we want to take, as well as the amounts of dollars that we're putting on each of those efforts. And so I want to thank all of you as well for your work that you've been doing, gathering community feedback and constituent feedback. I know a number of you were at the engagement events that we did, and I want to thank you for your participation in and feedback in the strategic plan. So this is just another summary to show how many participants we had. We had over 2,000 participants. I think it was much more than that, but that's what we can officially account for. 102 meetings, 125 schools visited, and we have developed a mission, which is every child in every classroom in every school receiving what they need. And I've shortened this, that just give them what they need. And so we are really working on a mission to work on inequity and to remove barriers. And obviously this COVID crisis has really shined a bright light on that essential work. And it's nice that we had a jump start on it and that our community had actually inspired this plan and our community had driven the plan forward. And our vision is a nation-leading, student-centered public school district providing an equitable, excellent, well-rounded education that prepares every student for success in college, career, and life. And we believe that if we give every student what they need and we earn the trust and true partnership of our families, our community members, and our stakeholders through this authentic engagement and shared leadership and decision-making, that we will deliver excellent service to students and families and provide educators and staff with the professional development and clear expectations. Then we'll become high-performing nation-leading district. We will close gaps and we will improve life outcomes for each student. So let me talk just briefly about the BPS-DESE MOU. I know that there have been questions about this in the alignment and the Student Opportunity Act. First, I'll share about the Student Opportunity Act. As you know, many of you advocated for that act, and but that doesn't realize a lot of funding for the city at this point. We do think that the Student Opportunity Act will eventually and over the long term be good for the city, but currently, those numbers are about 1.8 million in the Student Opportunity Act, which requires us then to provide a Student Opportunity Act plan to the DESE, and that was due April 1st, but there was an extension. That was due then, I think it's May 18th, or it's in the middle of May. We've already done that. It's going to school committee on the 29th for approval. And we're using our strategic process as part of that and aligning that also to the strategic direction and this plan. But outside of that, because of the review in regard of not having receivership or not having a zone type of relationship with the DESE, what we've done is really tried to negotiate a third way, and a third way to do a partnership with Boston Public Schools and the State Department around issues found within the review, because I believe that the commissioner saw that we had strong community support of the strategic plan. There was a strong commitment from the mayor financially to support that strategic plan and direction. And I think then that aligned what we actually had agreed to in the MOU. And I think there's a lot of misunderstanding around the MOU. And I wanted to make sure that I cleared it up for you, that the MOU really is aligned nicely to the strategic plan, in that the 4 things that we are asked to do that already are in the strategic plan is to focus on our 33 lowest performing schools. We had shared that we believe that the way to have high quality schools in every neighborhood was to start with those that were underperforming the most and had the students in it that were most vulnerable. And so that's where our focus will be with this budget, and especially this first year of the budget. Then the second is equitable access. Go back, Nate, to student supports. And so this is really important for ensuring and expanding quality and expanding opportunity to advance courses, to making sure that there's a level of rigor, and that's going to start with the Mass Core adoption, and then moving backwards there with the curricular work that we need to do to ensure that there's this deep level of rigor, as well as high expectations for our students, and a good level of coherence to the state standards across the entire enterprise. And so that's not happening right now. And there's a lot more that we need to do to align to those state standards and those state expectations around the Mass Core. The third then is to really work to fix our special education system so that our students with disabilities have the right supports that they need to be able to achieve at a higher level for life independence. and work readiness. And so we are taking a sharp focus on students with disabilities. I've hired Tammy Poost to come here. She's a specialist and lawyer in special education, and she's going to be working with our special education division as we begin to think about restructuring and working very strategically to serve our students with disabilities. And then, of course, the yearly struggle to get transportation right. So much of this is tied into improving our overall operations. So much of transportation is connected to so many other things, and transportation itself is connected to students getting to school on time and not losing instructional hours or having their education interrupted. So this is really important for us to get right. Obviously, with COVID, this is going to be quite a challenge. And so we are going to really be looking at that. We've had a transportation expert with us all year, working on recommendations now with COVID and undetermined time frames around start of school and what that will entail. Obviously, these recommendations could shift. And so we will come back around to whatever those recommendations are to the school committee when we get to that point. As for the DESE, their work is going to be around deeper learning. They've initiated a project this year. We had two schools originally, the Tech Boston School and Elliott School, and then they've expanded that support to our East Boston and Charlestown schools, the schools where we had expanded our K-6 expansion and pathways. It presents a nice region to be able to do this deeper learning and this work around acceleration academies and early college with our high schools within that region. Then second, they're going to work on partnerships and helping us with partnerships. Third, they're going to help with teacher diversity through a housing program. I guess the commissioner had done this in Lawrence. It had worked nicely. I know that we already have some housing incentives for our Boston residents, and so it'll be interesting to see how that aligns. And then some facility work in terms of helping us procure and do some facility works around bathrooms. Obviously, you'll see the capital improvement plans that we had already been asking for around bathrooms and water and upgrades within our facilities. So that aligns nicely to our capital improvement plan. It aligns nicely to Build PPS. It aligns nicely to the strategic plan. And so I hope as you've seen these three slides that you've been able to see that we are really strategically thinking about coherence, and we are strategically thinking about the district moving at a very deeper systemic level with our central office staff restructuring, as well as our work to align Build PPS and our work on enrollment and registration, and then our partnership with the state. So the strategic plan has 6 major commitments. It did have 5, and we added a 6th based on feedback during that 30-day period, which is to activate partnerships and to be more deliberate around that handshake with our partnerships and our community. This is even more pronounced now with COVID, how important it is to have an all hands on deck to problem solve these deep inequities within our system and to be able to address systemic barriers that have been for far too long impacting the success of our children. Then to cultivate trust. One of the things that was very loud and clear with our community was that there was this stress of trust between the community, between parents, between BPS, and some of that is with transparency and communications. Some of that is with engagement. Some of that is with shared decision-making and how decisions get made. And some of that is with some of the diversity initiatives that we believe are needed within the central office and within our schools. Then expanding opportunity and making sure that we are able to have advanced opportunities for all, making sure that we improve our equitable funding across schools, is to include fundraising and other opportunities, and expanding advanced coursework, and making sure that all students in all schools have the same opportunity. Then amplifying all voices. This is the shared decision-making model. We've convened equity tables, and we've been able to work through a lot of that engagement process. I'm very proud of the work we've done around amplifying all voices. I've already talked a little bit about accelerating learning within our high schools and our inclusive environments. and then eliminating opportunity and achievement gaps, which is our #1 absolute priority within the district. And that's around creating culturally relevant materials, linguistically relevant, that honor our heritage. Also that we have programs for our SLIFE students and our EL students that are appropriate and help them to accelerate their learning. So with that, I think this side is mine too. And this is just about, again, reiterating that the 3-year commitment, I don't think most people understand that this compounds each year. So this first year, we have an ask of 30 plus million. Then the next year will be another 30 plus million. And then the next year, another 30 plus million to get you to the full 100 annual each year moving forward. And this matches what we anticipate would be the commitment from the SOA reimbursements, but it would be in a more accelerated time frame. So with that, I think I'll turn it over to Nate Cooter. Oh, wait. I need to talk about COVID, sorry. So even though we don't know the full impacts of COVID, I wanted to include this slide because I know that you all were concerned about it, and that we are looking to address racial and economic inequalities, of course, within the system, and that this budget actually was built on that premise. We want to continue to change how we look at instruction over learning over time, and that this budget was built on that. However, with COVID, we know that there will be learning loss, and it will be inequitable across the district. And so we are trying to account for that and how we think about summer school and summer school options, how we think about remote learning. And now that we've thrust and everyone is receiving Chromebooks, how do we look at that approach? And then the emotional supports that we are providing, and how do we build and learn from COVID on the emotional and family support systems that we put in place, that these aren't just for COVID. If there are best practices that are learned here, how do we continue those then moving into the future? And then how do we really close this digital divide? And I think that's a critical piece for us, because not only does it allow for remote learning to happen for our children, but it really does provide a life link for the family to be connected. And I think that this is important, in terms of continued work readiness for families, opportunities for families to access communication, timely communications for emergencies, as well as health access or food access or other necessary life aspect assets that they need. So I think that this is incredibly important to really close this digital divide. And then just as the way we engage with families around shared decision making, and this is with our cultivating trust and amplifying voice. Can these new tools really help us find new ways to engage more proactively with our families around their children's education, around their family needs? So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Nate Cooter.
Thank you, Superintendent, and thank you, counselors, for joining us this morning and allowing us to come and present our budget. It's helpful for us to start off with a lot of the framing that the superintendent provided, because our budget doesn't exist in a vacuum. It exists in the reality of what our students are facing, what our teachers are facing, and what we as a district are facing. But it's helpful for us to go back and start with a statement that grounded our planning really what seemed like a lifetime ago is really 6 months ago. And we started a budget process rooted in the statement that's on the screen now from the Opportunity and Achievement Gap Policy. And we recognize that we need to close opportunity and achievement gaps and guarantee an excellent education for all students. And we think that by focusing on students who need public education the most and providing intensive support to those schools that are struggling to improve, that we can ensure all students have the same opportunity to achieve greatness. And I think that's our ambitious goal with this budget, and we're fortunate to have the backing of the city and from this council to be able to achieve those goals. 100% of new investment dollars in the budget this year are going directly to schools or to school services budgeted centrally. 80% of this proposal represents direct services to students in schools through direct funding. So what we have is an $80 million increase over our FY20 budget. This is an unprecedented amount for us, and we're truly excited to be able to invest in our schools and our students in this way. The 36 million of that 80 million are going directly to schools, as I mentioned. The remaining 44 million represents the increased costs, including the collective bargaining costs from the BTU contract. Overall, we're asking for a $1.3 billion budget to fund the Boston Public Schools in FY21. Our budget proposal is focusing on what Richard Elmore first coined the term the instructional core. The instructional core has three main ingredients: the teacher and the student in the presence of content. And it's in this relationship, not in the individual qualities of any one of these three things, where the quality of education is determined and the extent of learning is happening. And it is a bit unusual for us to start a budget presentation by talking about instruction, but really what we're proposing here is a budget that is designed around the straightforward premise that there are three ways to increase student learning. First, increasing the knowledge and the skill of teachers. Two, changing the content. And three, altering the relationship of the student to the content and the teachers. And while our current context has thrown that relationship into a new circumstance, and we are rapidly adapting our organization, we know that going into FY21, into next school years, that we're going to need to invest even more heavily in these resources, that we were already positioning our planning around those things that are going to help us recover from COVID, because those are the things that are going to help our district and our students move forward more quickly. Over the course of our, I think, 8 hearings that we have with the City Council that are aligned directly to our strategic plan, we'll be talking a lot about the different elements of our budget and getting into the deep department information, answering your questions about core operations. But today's presentation really is focused on what we think is going to move the needle for our district and for our students. And of course, that relationship of the three parts of the instructional core do not exist as standalone elements. Students exist in an ecosystem of families and our communities, how we're supporting each other, how students are supported at home and in the classroom. Teachers are existing in their little ecosystems of schools and in the district at large. And then content exists as a continuum of resources, not just high quality instructional materials or technology that gets right into the classroom, but also in the curriculum frameworks and in the professional learning that you'll see as part of this budget as well, to make sure teachers are constantly improving their craft and understanding the best ways to meet the needs of all of their students. To that end, our $36 million in new investments this year are aligned to that instructional core. $9 million of that is to support students and families through new resources directly on school budget. $12 million is directed to instructional quality and enhancing the educational opportunities for students throughout the district. And $15 million is about high quality learning materials and resources. It's an investment in the basics like cleanliness and in the 21st century learning through technology. During the superintendent's community engagement this fall, the district utilized a visual note taker, and the artist created a visual, sort of stunning visual display, which I used in one of the earlier slides, or the superintendent used in one of the earlier slides. When you actually see it, it's something like 4 feet by 10 feet, and when we get back into the bowling building, you can see it in the superintendent's conference room. And one of the things that struck me while I was viewing this was a quote that said, "We need to recognize the complexity of our students." Never more so than now is it important for us to recognize that we have a diversity of interests and needs. We have a range of behavior and experiences, and we have those who have experienced trauma and loss and those who are stifled by the persistence of poverty. And therefore, we're prioritizing $9 million to do a better job of supporting our children and families, to improve their relationship with schools and with their teachers, and to unlock their ability to access content and express knowledge. The first investment that we want to highlight today is the creation of a family liaison position with linguistic capacity at our 33 transformation schools. With 123 different schools, a complex school choice system, program shifts and grade configuration shifts coming from Bill BPS, it's easy to see why we need to engage in more and different ways. And so we believe these family liaison positions will become a trusted member of our community and connect and support families to resources in BPS and in the community. And just as you can't separate a student from their social emotional needs, you can't separate instruction from our social emotional approach. And so this budget supports what we often refer to as a multi-tiered system of support, or MTSS. This is a whole school approach to ensuring that all adults are working together to remove barriers for student success and identify struggling students early to intervene more quickly. This was a strategy that we had identified before things had happened in our current circumstances, and the fact that our students are facing a collective trauma only redoubles the need for us to continue to invest in these social emotional supports for our students. Together, the $9 million I referenced are listed here so that you can see the specific. I'm only highlighting a few of our investments, but obviously in a $1.26 billion budget, there's a lot of line items that we can discuss. Wanted to show you all of the specific investments, and you'll see a summary slide after each section that kind of highlights what are the specific investments under each category. I'll also take this as an opportunity to note that a lot of this information is available on our website, bostonpublicschools.org/budget, where you can download a line item budget as well as explore budgets using a new online visualization tool that we created last year. Three investments are aligned to deliver high quality instruction to more engaged students who are focused and ready to learn. This is part of our strategy for driving instructional quality. Through this, we are ensuring that schools have capable and well-trained instructional facilitators to provide supports and accountability to educators. They're also getting more collaborative time with teachers, and we're changing the experience for students. So the benefit is for students, they are going to have expanded access to art, music, science, and physical education in the fall. At our 33 transformation schools, you're going to see students with more of these opportunities and more ways to express themselves. And of course, I wanted to take a moment to highlight this specific investment, particularly around the arts, music, and science. We've seen examples online of students coming together in what I think is called asynchronous recordings, where they're doing dances at home to the same beat. My house, I know, is filled with a lot of music and creativity right now. And so that type of joy that comes from access to the arts is something that we want to spread and provide more opportunities for our students. So we are filled with joy to be able to present a budget that changes the student experience by increasing access to art and music. Students have more opportunities to explore their passions, to fuel their creativity and curiosity, and to feel success. And we think that as a result, students will be more focused and engaged in core instruction when they return to their homeroom teachers, who have also been receiving more time to collaborate, more time to receive instructional coaching and work on their practices. The last thing I want to highlight in this category is that we are working to increase the skill and craft of teaching. So Boston is very fortunate. We have so many great educators. Our dedicated teachers and school-based staff work tirelessly for our kids. We've seen them be more creative and create more content and interesting lessons now over the last few weeks. And so in the next year, we're going to ask them to reflect on these practices and implement new ways to teach in new and more inclusive ways. And so we're preparing to support this change through team-based professional development, higher quality instructional materials, and frequent coaching and feedback. Here you can see the detailed investments that come in this category. This is the $12 million that I highlighted going towards teaching and instruction. The last category of investments that we mentioned starts with raising the bar on the quality of learning environment. And we want our buildings to be a point of pride and our students have access to the latest technology for learning. During budget season, I had the opportunity to visit Tech Boston in Dorchester and meet with their class. It was actually an English class where they were talking about educational equity. And I met with students and talked to them about what they wanted. And they said they wanted things like job-embedded classes. Of course, they didn't use those terminology, but they were talking about more economics classes or business classes. But they also started to talk about the basics like radiator covers or cleaner bathrooms. And that's the part of what we need to deliver as a system to make sure that we're raising the bar on those basics. We know that school environments impact learning. Our job is to ensure that facilities support learning by investing in building condition and cleanliness. And so this goes in part, as the superintendent mentioned, with our capital plan that includes improvements in bathrooms, classrooms, and playgrounds, among other many investments. We've already seen a rapid expansion of student access to technology. Mark Racine, our director, our head of instructional technology, and really the entire BPS team has been working tirelessly to make sure Chromebooks are delivered to students. We purchased, in response to COVID, 20,000 laptops, which we have been distributing to students in complementing our existing fleet of laptops. Almost 30,000 laptops have been delivered. We're going to continue that investment in FY21 to really rapidly expand student access to technology and continue to invest in this. We've recognized really the extent of the digital divide. We're starting to think about ways to expand not only access to the laptops themselves, but also to think about home access to internet so that students can get online and access their technology as well. Our effort to improve literacy begins by recognizing that students bring a range of knowledge and experiences that influence their learning and their engagement. Our world demands high levels of literacy in a variety of formats. And to make sure our students meet this demand, we begin with research-based strategies in the area of reading, writing, listening, and speaking. We need high quality and culturally linguistically sustaining text. We need to raise teachers' expectations for their students so that all students develop curiosity and critical thinking skills. And we need to broaden teaching and learning based on the reality of students' experience. We need teachers to be able to differentiate instruction and provide complex and engaging text for an increasingly diverse student body. And this takes an investment in curriculum materials. So this year we are increasing our investment in K-8 literacy, focusing on that as the first step to rapidly improving instructional quality in BPS. Overall, the $15 million in investments, starting with student devices and going down to our kindergarten program for Boston Saves, which is a financial literacy program. I'm highlighting that not just because I'm the finance guy, but it is an important investment for us to think about the financial literacy of our students starting at a very early stage. This next slide, if you're going to look at one slide from our presentation to understand the BPS budget, this is the best slide. It highlights the different categories of how we think about our budget. And so the first category, of course, is direct school expenses. Those are the investments and the spending that you'll find directly in schools when you walk through the classrooms. It's the teachers that you see, it's the principals and secretaries, it's the spending that schools use for things like supplies. The second category are what we refer to as school services budgeted centrally. So those are items that will actually be listed on a central office budget, but are not really central office spending. One example of that is our custodial staff, on which we're making a significant investment this year. The custodial staff is all budgeted in our facilities department, but by and large, the custodians will be found in all of our schools and supporting the cleanliness and maintenance of our schools. Another example is related service providers for special education, occupational therapists, speech therapists. Those are all budgeted in our central office for special education, but are found directly serving schools. The second category is central administration. You can see that central administration makes up a very small portion of our overall budget. We are a lean organization, particularly when compared to other school districts in Massachusetts. That is the superintendent's salary, that's my finance team. Those are the things you traditionally think of as central office support. And then finally, we've broken out the percentage of our budget that is going to non-BPS student services. And those are for students who are residents of Boston, but not attending the Boston Public Schools. It's things like charter school transportation, out-of-district special education tuition, and those types of expenses. The last thing I want to highlight around our budget is our efforts to ensure and monitor ourselves for equity. And so the Boston Public Schools wants to guarantee every student access to quality schools and academic and enriching experiences. And the finance team is committed to doing this with an eye towards equity. So in the past, our guarantee of a foundational funding has been very limited. And this afternoon at the school hearing, David will talk more about how we've made significant investments to raise the bar on quality. What the $100 million commitment, the 3-year conversation around spending allows us to do is have the opportunity to have a different conversation starting this year and continuing till fiscal year 23. And so what we're going to be doing throughout this process is really highlighting for the community and for you some of the considerations that are in place when we start considering equity. And so what we've done is break down all of our spending by a number of different demographic groups to ensure that our investments are going to close achievement gaps and opportunity gaps. Over the last 3 years, we've made a lot of investments and spent a lot of time to understand our spending. And 2 years ago, we took steps to attach every dollar to students. And so, for example, we divided the number of summer school students, the total budget for summer school based on the students who are actually attending summer school, and then compared that by race, race and ethnicity, income status, special education status, and English learner status. So we can really, look at the data that way. And as part of the analysis, we found that while some parts of our budget are relatively evenly spread, that such as central office spending, which really benefits all students equally, other parts are intentionally allocated and differentiated by students group. And this reflects the school budget and part of our efforts through weighted student funding to ensure equity. What we've done this year is highlight some of the equity impacts of the investments that we're making. The first one being the school transformation funding. And we announced $21 million in investment in our highest need schools, those we keep referring to as the transformation schools. To help us understand the equity implications of this spending, we've calculated the average amount that students will receive. On the far right, you can see that overall, all students will see an increase of 388 as part of this initiative, but that this turnaround spending most benefits students with disabilities, English learners, and low-income students, as well as Black and Latinx students. Those are the students that are benefiting most from this level of investment. The next category is a new investment around Bill BPS. We're making a number of Bill BPS investments in our schools. This has to do with supporting schools through the transition of adding 6th grade and supporting middle schools as they lose enrollment as the elementary schools add a 6th grade. Our operating budget for Bill BPS spending totals $3.9 million, and most of the spending is temporary and focused on supporting students in East Boston and other schools with K-6 expansion. Because East Boston serves an outsized number of Latinx students, you'll see that this investment is most directed towards that student group. You'll notice in the upper right of each of these slides, we've identified whether or not we think that this promotes our vision for equity, or whether or not it promotes more of a parity, which is making sure that all students have a basic access to certain resources. We're also making a number of investments in our secondary schools. Some of these initiatives are targeted at specific groups. For instance, we're making a targeted investment in mentoring for Black and Latinx students, while the investment in menstrual products serves women. And so you can see how those will be targeted groups that will benefit from those investments. I'll make one last investment highlight here and encourage you to review the full equity analysis that's in the slides. But it was a new investment that came through the BTU contract in the addition of a paraprofessional for all K2 classes. And so starting next year, every single K2 class will have a full-time paraprofessional. Prior to this, there was a half-time paraprofessional allocated in each of our kindergarten classes. And so we're making a pretty sizable investment in this, this paraprofessional. And while this investment will benefit all students in K2, our K2 grade tends to be whiter than the district as a whole. 19% of K2 students are white compared to 14% of students overall. And similarly, K2 is 40% English learners compared to 29% across all grades. The thing that this investment really highlights is that when you provide a resource to all schools equally and all classrooms equally, and ensuring that all students have access to it in parity, that you see that it does not benefit from what we have traditionally thought of as an equity investment. And so in this case, the K2 paraprofessional benefits our white students. It costs $126 per student compared to $76 for Asian students. And then when you look at it, our students who are qualifying as low income receive $88 per pupil versus $108 for students who are not identified as low income. And so that's one of the challenges that when we start to think about providing things for all schools, because we have so many small schools in Boston and our small schools are disproportionately white and disproportionately non-low income, then when we really promote parity and something for all, that it does not address closing opportunity achievement gaps, it does not address our traditional definition of equity. The same thing can be found in custodians, where we're guaranteeing an overnight custodian in every single school. This is incredibly important investment, and it shows that, again, because the schools that traditionally don't have a full-time overnight custodian or nighttime custodian, are their smaller schools, that this investment really ensures parity more than it does equity. But overall, our new investments in our FY21 budget, particularly the new money that we're putting into the budget this year to support our students, does promote our agenda for equity and closing opportunity achievement gaps. And we feel that importantly raises the level of quality across all of our schools and prepares us to make great gains in FY21 as we start that planning for next year. With that, I'll just note again that there's a lot of resources available online for people to access it, including all of the FY21 budget presentations that we did to our school committee, as well as we'll continue to post resources from the City Council. And all of our City Council hearings are aligned to the strategic plan that the superintendent highlighted at the start. And we encourage all of our many fans at home to come and join us online for those hearings. And with that, I will turn it back over to you, Chairwoman.
Thank you so much, Nate. And thank you, Superintendent Caselius. All right, we are going to jump into questions. I'll start, and again, I'll be strict with myself. We're going to do 5-minute rounds. I realized, this is just for my council colleagues, realized yesterday that it's awkward for me to gavel over Zoom. So if you have hit your 5 minutes, I'm just going to hold my gavel in the video so you can take that visual cue to wrap up. Hopefully that'll work. So I guess, Superintendent and Nate, I just wanted to jump in with the question that I think, is on many people's minds about, here we have a budget which went through a whole process, and yet most of that process happened prior to the emergency that we find ourselves in. Obviously, you've already had to repurpose FY20 funds for emergency purposes in this period. So how are we thinking about the ways in which we can anticipate that we would need to spend money differently in the the months ahead? And I know that none of us know exactly when the public health emergency might be at a place where we could, start gathering together again. And so I'm not asking you to have crystal ball on that front. But it seems as though there are areas with learning loss that our students are experiencing where we must know that we are already going to have to commit resources differently. And I know, Nate, that you sort of stressed that a bunch of the investments that we're already making here are along those lines, but I don't think we can say that the budget submitted in February was so prescient that it got all of that right. And so I guess that's my sort of overarching question to you. And then in terms of some of the materials that you sent over in answer to the council's request for information, I just wanted to clarify on a few things. Sort of, is the increased there's some strange thing, like the increase in equipment, I assume has something to do that in what we've actually spent in the last year has to do with getting the Chromebooks. There's kind of a weird lower expenditure rate on food. I assume that has something to do with contract payment timing or something, but just wanted to kind of check in on that. And curious what the contracted educational line item that's way up is. So I'll start with that.
So maybe I can start with just a little bit of the answer to that, and then Nate can pop in where I missed something. I think that, yes, you're right. COVID has really shined a bright light on the inequities, but this budget was built on the inequity, right? And so I think what I'm anticipating in terms of any adjustments that we might make, and we do have some federal resources from stimulus coming that we anticipate we will be able to use to help with some of the remote learning, as well as some of the support systems for children and family that we think we're going to need. But there are three key positions in this budget. One is the instructional facilitator. We know we're going to need that to continue to define what does remote learning look like, especially if we are in a situation where we do have longer closure or where we have remote learning happening, and any kind of rolling kind of potential to closing and reopening and that in terms of the school calendar. The family liaisons and connecting folks to services, I think that is absolutely going to be an essential position. And then the technology pieces that we have in place here in this budget, and the focus on literacy around what we're doing with students, and the focus there in terms of the response to what we know will be some learning loss. I think that some of the stimulus money will also potentially help us with summer opportunities that are coming up as well. So, you know, it is really built on it. I think what's troubling for me, at least as I'm trying to think about the budget, is the fact that we've done most of our focusing in those 33 schools for those additional positions. And I do think the need will be greater in a number of other schools when we weren't anticipating that, you know, all students would be having trauma or all students would be having this level of need. So we have 125 schools, and we, of course, were focusing on those that were in the greatest need. But I do think with COVID, this is, there's just a bigger need. And Nate, I don't know if you want to add anything. And I think if we're all on mute, then we won't. I think I'm hearing a little bit of background.
Yeah, the only thing I would just add is one of the steps that we took over the last few weeks to ensure flexibility for organization was to put a temporary hold on some of the final spending that we were planning to do as a district and work with schools. Part of that was a very practical need. We couldn't continue to take deliveries and process the requisitions. And part of it was also to maintain some financial flexibility with some of our, in particular, our federal entitlement grants, so that we can start thinking about what are those supplemental services that we may need to add over the summer or going into the fall. And so that does, in addition to the significant investments that we're making for FY21 and the increase, we're starting to think about how do we create that sort of flexibility for us. But as you mentioned, it is pretty early. There's been a lot of information coming out about some of the federal stimulus package work, and we're working very closely with our city partners as well to understand the implications for us going into the next year, and to identify potential places of flexibility as we start to learn more about what we need to do. And I think you asked a couple of technical questions about some contracts. And I'm going to, at this point, introduce our Deputy CFO, David Bloom, who's going to walk you through some of those changes that you're seeing in the tables for spending and budget.
Good morning, City Council. It's a pleasure to see you all again, even if it's virtually. So I heard you mention three particular in our budget that I'm happy to go through. The first of which was our technology line. So our technology purchasing that Nate was mentioning earlier is largely happening through our lease purchase agreement. And so it does not show up in the technology portion of the line, but it does show up in the lease purchase debt service and debt principal. The second question around food. Our food service primarily shows up on a grant budget. It's primarily reimbursed the federal government. In the current year, we've had to spend some of our general fund money on food services as well, as part of our transition to My Way Cafe and some of the other work that's happening. We are anticipating that overage, the general fund expenditure over what we get in reimbursement from the federal government, to reduce for next year, which is a good thing. We could be aiming to live inside of that grant as a best practice. And then finally, you mentioned contracted services, I believe. In contracted services, there are two main sources of new costs for next year. The first is a number of the costs in the Universal Pre-K Expansion Trust that we've incurred for this year are moving on to the general fund for next year. And primarily in terms of contracted services, that's where our payment out to the community providers come under our budget. And the second thing is the professional development investment that Nate mentioned earlier is currently budgeted under contracted services as well. Those are the main costs, smaller adjustments.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, no, I was also just curious about, there seems to be an overrun just for this year, even in terms of actual spending on contractual services. But we'll move on. I've got lots more questions, but I want to make sure we start moving through my colleagues. So I'll recognize Councillor Michael Flaherty first, Councillor at Large, to be followed by Councillor Andrea Campbell and Councillor Nisa Sapi-George.
Good morning, Madam Chair and the Superintendent and team. I had stepped away just for a brief minute. I just want to make sure that when do we expect everyone to have a Chromebook, and is there teaching and learning going on as we speak across the district?
There is a lot of teaching and learning going on around the district, absolutely. And Nate just shared some stories about his creative work that's going on. I know I'm getting examples of it every day on my inbox from the wonderful work that teachers are doing. What is troubling and something we're working on in terms is the expectations for teachers. And so we are working on a phase 2 of the learning. As you know, when we first closed, it was a very different situation than we are in today. And it was more about supplemental learning activities that we were providing. We provided packets to our students at the food distribution centers, as well as we were able to hand some of those out to students who were in attendance that Monday before closure. And then we've been providing and expanding the delivery. Our original delivery of the Chromebooks was going to be where we were doing mass deliveries, and then within a couple days we found that that wasn't going to be safe because of the social distancing. So then we had to quickly shift to home delivery, and then home delivery became more of a challenge because of distribution, and we had to figure out how to get smaller numbers of volunteers into our distribution sites so that they then would have social safe distancing. We had to figure out PPE for them. So a number of challenges to getting the Chromebooks out, as well as then being able just to contact families with correct addresses and correct phone numbers. So we still continue to get out Chromebooks. I think we've have over, I think it's 28,000 Chromebooks now that have been delivered. Nate, maybe you can get that number from Charlene while I'm talking here, and then get that to you. But yeah, a number, and we have shifted also to pickup. So it's both home delivery and pickup now, and we are trying to reach the last of our students in that to ensure that they're able to access and be connected. The bigger issue for us is also connecting Wi-Fi and making sure that our families have appropriate Wi-Fi and high-speed internet for the connectivity, so that they can be connected to their teachers. Teachers are using multiple methods of delivery for instruction. They're using the BNN, which we have a great partnership with. They're using our curated district-wide lessons that are available on our website that Andrea Zayas and our Chief Academic Officer and the team has been doing. Really wonderful learning opportunities for families to tie into and teachers to get, as well as really formalized Google Classrooms accessing their digital backpacks and Clever. Our high school students are doing projects and connecting with their teachers. We've been doing mental health supports and SEL connections as well for our students. So a number of things happening, but we do know that there are also a number of students that we are still trying to reach, and it is very, very challenging because of the COVID situation. A number of students were living with grandparents, and when the over 60 order came, some of those students were shipped out of state or shipped to other relatives in different addresses. So we've been trying to get to the bottom of that, as well as their phone service being disconnected. And so we're just trying to figure that out. We have a survey going out to all of our families. As last week, we started that on Monday, and I think we have over 17,000 respondents to that.
And for our chronically underperforming schools, what are we going to be doing different other than just sort of throwing money and programming at it? What's the plan moving forward to address? I know that from the slideshow we have 33 sort of underperforming schools. A significant number of them are chronically underperforming. But at what point do we do something different?
Yeah, so I'll answer that in just a second. Nate, did you have something to add on the other?
Yeah, I just wanted to note that we've distributed 28,372 Chromebooks, and my fun fact for you right now is that number was updated. That 4 Chromebooks were delivered since you started your original question on Chromebooks.
Good stuff.
So that is a rapidly increasing number.
And that's the wonderful thing. Our data team has been working incredibly on a data dashboard that we hope will be ready sometime end of this week, early next week. And so we've been looking at these opportunities and inequities. And, you know, as we reinvent the wheel here, trying to get at every single student. As for the underperforming schools and what we were planning on doing and how that may shift with COVID, we have been working on a literacy adoption so that there's coherence around the professional learning that we would give in terms of literacy. As you know, that's a fundamental learning block for being able to teach content to students. And so that's a big piece of the work, as well as working on the hub school model, which is the connectedness to our partnerships and the surrounding support systems for families. That's going to happen through the Family Liaison and the connections at work there. And then we've installed an instructional facilitator to work with the principal on instructional leadership. And that's going to be working with teachers on their practice and doing interventions and supports to students. Of course, we have inclusionary practices as well that will be working in co-teaching models and that sort of thing around. These are all real technical universal design. Some of those things that are very technical in nature to teaching and learning as we look at our students. They'll also be on an interim assessment cycle so that we can look and where the progress is and working with these students more regularly on intervention and flexible grouping to ensure that they're getting the supports that they need rather than waiting to the end of the year to assess them. It'll be ongoing assessments as part of the teaching and learning process.
I see the chairwoman waving the hockey stick in the background, so I'm going to, I'll leave it at that question. I appreciate it, Superintendent. I'll stay on for the next round of questioning. Appreciate it.
Just one other thing with that too, we are working on transformational leadership because leadership really matters. And so we will be working with our school leaders in a very unique way to grow their leadership around how they lead these initiatives.
Thank you, Superintendent. Thank you, Councillor Flaherty. Next up is Councillor Andrea Campbell, to be followed by Councillor Ed Flynn.
Thank you, Councillor Bach, and thank you, Superintendent, and your incredible team for the work you guys are doing. Obviously, it is a new context with COVID-19, so I appreciate all your efforts. Obviously, one of the key things to us working in supporting you in the work, including the administration on education issues, is data. And I know that you offered some data updates on the call that you had with the council maybe a couple of weeks ago. But looking forward to creating a mechanism where we can get some more data updates more frequently without having to have a hearing, without having to ping you guys in the midst of all you're doing. And it sort of flagged that for you yesterday. So we'll continue that conversation separately around access to computers and access to internet, et cetera. And as a way, of course, for us to work in partnership and to support any way we can your efforts. I also, of course, want to applaud school leaders and teachers who are on the ground in this new context doing great things. I was participating in a call with Ms. Curtin at the Shaw School, who invited some community members to be a part of the classroom experience, and it was phenomenal. And so there are great examples where this is going really well, the online experience. And then there are some, some examples that are not going the best. And so look forward to continuing to figure out how we eradicate that, right? So I'm curious to hear more of your thoughts, and you did speak to this early in the presentation around teacher expectation. Some, obviously, Ms. Curtin clearly knew what she was doing in that Zoom classroom. I learned something from her. She had families, parents engaged, people in the community. Curious for those who may struggle because they need more supports, what are we doing for those teachers, school leaders, and staff to make sure that that online experience is consistent across the board?
Yeah, thank you for that question. And I'm glad you're able to participate with some of the really creative work that's happening. It is really exciting to see. Especially as we bring joy into some of those classrooms, those new classrooms and into students' homes, and families are participating in it too, so which is really cool. But there is really broad disparity on the readiness of teachers to do remote learning, because this wasn't an expectation in our school district before, that every student is doing this type of remote learning, especially not to this scale. And so you have teachers who have different experiences with technology and their ability to deliver the types of remote learning with the technology, which is where you find the most robust use of the remote learning, is the virtual classroom types of technologies. So Andrea Zayas and her team have been working with teachers on designing professional development. We've been working on finding those best practices and sharing them across the district with other teachers and getting teacher to teacher. I always say teachers learn best from other teachers. And I think that we're finding those master teachers within this virtual realm. And it doesn't mean that these teachers were poor teachers before. They just were teachers within the classroom and what they knew within the context of a traditional classroom. And what we're asking them to do is not replicate a traditional classroom in parents' homes, right? You cannot do that. It's very challenging. So what does this new environment look like, and how can we create it so that it's meaningful and relevant to the children, and that they don't have the learning loss, but that they actually accelerate their learning? I do believe that there will be some children whose learning is accelerated during this time too, just because they may engage better with this type of delivery. So I think that there's different ways to use this system, and with the expectations we're working out with teachers now, we've talked about one-to-one supports as well as full classroom supports. And so they'll be learning from each other through a new technology that we're using to deliver that professional development.
Thank you for that, and I appreciate that, and I think it's something we hear quite a bit, is how can we support our teachers and staff in this new environment? And then the second piece, before my time probably runs out, is on family engagement. We obviously know how critical that is to be engaging families, and I know, in the past, even in the Hunt School experience, this was, I think, before you actually arrived, but there was trouble with finding sort of accurate phone numbers and email addresses for our parents. So how are we ensuring that that information is correct? And then my second question related to that is, I know there's an investment in some family engagement liaisons. I do a lot of work with civic associations and civic leaders across the city who are phenomenal, who are on the ground, volunteer resident leaders, who are now, turning their civics into mutual aid groups, who have the trusted relationships of the folks on their streets, who speak the language, who would be great ambassadors, not only to getting information out for BPS, but for all of our departments. But great ambassadors in trying to broker that trust that you're trying to create in certain communities where it might be broken, right? Or restore, I should say, that trust. And so I'm curious how we might think about using some of these civic leaders and civic groups, understanding, of course, as they're engaging with families and children, but we can be very careful. I know background checks and all of that play a role, but there is some value, I think, and they're underutilized in many contexts, and they want to be used in the government, by government, to serve community. So I'm curious how our family engagement community in BPS could be working with these civic leaders on the ground, and then how we're ensuring that the information we have is correct for families so that no one falls through the cracks.
Yeah, so we've been working with our partners pretty closely on many of the aspects of this COVID response, especially with food delivery. We've had some support with our Haitian community to deliver food, and some of our immigrant community where they haven't felt that they wanted to go to our food distribution sites or access other sites. So we've been figuring out some home delivery for them. In terms of connections, we are still trying to understand that knot that we have to try to untie that. Whereas we don't have a proper address, we don't have a proper phone number. The child has been moved to a family member out of state. So we've lost contact. And so I think that that's a hard thing for us. So we've been surveying, we've been trying to do friend to friend. We've been activating our community connections to try to find these students. And so we'll just continue to do that one by one to try to account for every single one of our students. And I think the other thing we're doing is within our Family Advancement Office, we have a partnership coordinator now, which we didn't have before, who is going to be tracking all of this information and where we have these partnerships, so that they're not just for this COVID response, but that we actually are being very deliberate about continuing these partnerships, because I think that we're learning a lot.
Thank you, Superintendent, and thank you, Councilor Bach.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Councillor Campbell. Next up is Councillor Flynn, to be followed by Councillor Wu and then Councillor Mejia. Councillor Flynn.
Yeah, good morning. Good morning, Superintendent.
Good morning.
Superintendent, as you know, these are difficult times for our students and for our teachers and for the families. I'm wondering, what are your thoughts as when school does eventually open? You know, a lot of the students are experiencing sleeping issues, difficulties, other mental health challenges because of this pandemic. What type of mental health counseling are we going to get our children, our parents, and including the BPS staff if they need it? What are your thoughts?
So I'm texting right now what our mental health numbers are, but I know that last week, I think we had nearly 4,000 contacts with our students, and we are working to develop telehealth as well with a number of our students, and I think it's over 500 of our students have received telehealth supports, if not more, now. And so I want to make sure we get those updated numbers for you. And so I'm going to push send there. And then
I have those, Superintendent, if you want me to just give a brief summary of, we've made 3,800 total contacts made for mental health services, including 1,247 unique students that have been contacted around mental health services. That includes 693 students who have attended sessions or received services through this. And so a big part of our efforts has been outreach. I also just wanted to note that one of the things that we're seeing, and this goes to, I think, a little bit to Councillor Campbell's comment as well. One of the things we're seeing is an increase in updates for student addresses and student contacts. So we are, as part of this, we're using a number of different new technologies to outreach to families and make sure we have updated contact information and reach out to those families in these circumstances.
I think just going forward, and my point really was, especially when school opens,
yes.
I think we really need to follow our students and their families very closely to make sure that they continue to get mental health counseling, because this isn't an issue you can solve in a month or 2 or 3 sessions. This has to be an ongoing dialogue of mental health counseling with the student or with their family.
Yeah, Counselor, it's a very important point. We had our first call, the first kind of official call yesterday with much of my staff talking about start of school and what will it look like when we start school again and what are the things that we need to account for. And the thing is typically, like the low performing schools we're focused on, we were going to focus on 33. Well, we know that every single one of our schools, the school staff, our school communities are all being impacted by this crisis, and that everybody is experiencing trauma from it. And so that's a very different situation than our typical school start, which is a very joyous one. Typically, and if kids are moving to the next grade level, they will not have had closure from the previous year with their peers and with their teachers. And so we have to think about how do we, put a stop to what we're doing now and then restart the new, and how does that transition, how does that phase? So we do have it on our plate to think about, and what are we going to do in our response? And we know also that it won't be just on the first day you do this special activity or have this special assembly. This is going to be ongoing for several months of work to bring back a sense of normalcy and sense of community and reestablish the connectedness that we had prior to the closure. So thank you,
Superintendent. Thank you. And my final question to Nate, I know you're going through the numbers of funding breakdown by kind of ethnic group. I noticed the Asian students had a lower fund that was distributed to them. Can you explain the reason why, as it relates to the funding with Asian students?
I think there are, obviously there are a number of potential complicating factors regarding funding for different ethnic groups. I think what we tend to find out is that this funding is very correlated with the schools that students attend. And so when I think about schools that have high concentration of Asian students, they tend to be some of our larger schools. The Quincy Elementary School is a fairly large elementary school. It's also not one of our transformation schools, so it's not receiving investments. The Mather is a larger elementary school. The Murphy is another one. I'm thinking just off the top of my head of some of the schools, which is always a little bit risky when we're talking about these demographics. And so it's helpful sometimes to sort of think about the multiple factors of things going on. I think the other thing has to do with how the investments are targeted around certain, so for instance, the Family Liaison investment is targeted around schools with over 50% of a single language. And there's only one school serving Asian students that has more than 50% of their family's first language is Chinese, and that's the Quincy Elementary, whereas there are a number of schools in the district where over 50% of the families are Spanish speaking. So those are some of the factors, just sort of as I think about it, that can go into it. So the big things to look at are, percentage of a group in special education, the size of the school overall, and then the number of families that are speaking a language other than English.
Yeah, just from my experience, Nate, the Asian students I have come in contact, which I do almost every day, a lot of them live in high poverty areas. Language is a challenge, especially to their parents. Limited access at times for technology. Low income of the parents as well. So I just want to work with you and make sure we're doing all we can for our Asian students as well. These are difficult times for all of us, but we really need more support for our low-income students.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Flynn. Next up is Councillor Michelle Wu, to be followed by Councillor Mejia and Councillor Breeden.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you again, Madam Chair, for your leadership and being so great about making sure everyone's on the same page with this new format. Thanks also to BPS and to the superintendent I know there's so much to ask, and it feels like we always had a lot to ask in these BPS budget hearings in particular, and now with COVID on top of everything. So I'm just going to pick a few and hope that we'll get into other parts of it during other hearings. So starting with following up on Councillor Flynn's line of questioning around schools reopening and kind of what the plan is there. Do we have a sense of when schools will be reopened? Is it anytime this school year, or are we realistically looking at next year?
I'm working closely with the mayor and the health officials to be able to determine that. As you know, there's been a recent flattening of the curve, but I think that that means that a little bit elongated then in terms of the response and the assuredness of the testing and the recovery. And so I anticipate having some conversations with the mayor continued on this week as well as next to make those determinations. And I know that the mayor is in close contact with the governor as well as health officials at the federal government and their level. So I don't have any answers on that. We do know that the current date is March 4th. And so, excuse me, May 4th. And so I hope to have more updated information for families in the next several weeks as we begin to really assess the situation.
So, assuming that anyway, there's still a lot of uncertainty, and so much of that is outside of the city's control, and certainly outside of BPS's control. I'd love to just hear a little bit about what is happening now in terms of the kind of medium to long-term planning for that. So things that have been running through my head and that constituents have raised to me include, when schools do reopen, whether it is, in mid-May or whether it is in next September, are we planning things like temperature checks for staff and students? What would be the staffing that is necessary and the purchasing of thermometers? Are we thinking about masks and anything like that? What are the sort of procedures and protocols that are being put in place for when there might be another outbreak? Because we know that there are often multiple peaks during a pandemic, and even once we flatten this first curve, there will likely be others. So do we know when schools will when individual schools or the system as a whole might be shut down again if there's some kind of flare up? How are you thinking about all those issues?
Yeah, so all of those are really important considerations for if we are to open or not open. And so I can tell you, and parents can feel assured, that we will not have children back to school until we are sure that they are safe and that their community is safe. And so I know that that is the highest consideration for the mayor and for myself personally, and really for all of us. And so we are absolutely considering all of those things that you just spoke about in terms of safety and health, but we're also thinking about continuity of learning, and we're also thinking about scheduling, and then we're thinking about mental health, like Councillor Flynn brought in, and what would be the considerations around that. A number of things, and whether that happens now, May 4th, optimistically thinking, and what that would look like in terms of reopening and restarting, which is easier than if it were to be reopened, in June or in September. So those are all considerations. And then we're also talking now, and have been for several weeks, about summer school and what does that look like, whether that's completely remote type of opportunity with Boston After School and Beyond and our own traditional types of summer schools, or whether, there's some sort of blended opportunity for students to be able to access some out-of-home learning opportunities that are still remote. I mean, there's just so many contingency plans right now that are in the works because it is just so unknown right now.
When will we get to the point where we might be able to see some of those plans of, past the point of consideration into, here are the, 1, 2, 3, 49, 50, 51 things that we need to be sure of for every building before it opens, or here's what would trigger another shutdown if we find out that a student's family has been tested positive, or a teacher has, there are many things to map out, but it feels at least that it could be mapped out now, the sort of tree of decision points could be mapped out now so that we are ready.
Yeah, so I think the best place of information for the city council would be with those weekly calls with the mayor. So I think that that's like the most important contact places where we really problem solve those pieces. As for BPS's response, the best place for BPS and where we're getting our best community engagement process is through our equity roundtable. And so we've been working with our equity roundtable to be able to give updates and to get feedback from them. We are just now starting on the restart plans because we're really trying to get this phase 2 perfect and get that going forward in terms of the instruction and the equity of opportunity across all schools. So our team has been focused on that. And like I said, just yesterday, we were starting on the restart conversation. So each week, those plans will get more and more embedded and understood depending on what we actually know about the situation. As you know, we had a plan when we first started and that shifted within 2 hours. And then, 2 days later, it was different. So they're constantly evolving plans.
So, just to give one example that, I think is a place where the non-BPS city plans intersect with the BPS plans. The Quincy school, the upper school, is now being used as a testing site for COVID, correct? That is open and running?
Charlene may be able to give a little bit more update on the Quincy. I know that it was prepared. I'm just not certain if it is at this point being used by Tufts because there was a delay in it for a few days after we prepared it.
Okay,
So,
that'd be great.
Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you, Councilwoman. Yes, the Tufts site at the Josiah Quincy Lower School is open. It was originally open for first responders and is now open to the public by appointment because obviously we don't want to have large congregations of people at one time. And so it has been open and it is testing approximately, I don't have an average, but I know it's been between 25 and up to 60 people a day. It is not being used for any other medical facility, just for testing at this point.
And if schools were to reopen this school year, what will happen to that testing site?
The testing site, there's a protocol for stepping down and doing deep cleaning in a similar fashion to what is being used at the medical facilities. So the protocols in place right now include, and I am not a medical expert, environmental expert, but there is a negative air pressure system to mitigate for any sort of spread of the virus into other parts of the building. There is industrial medical grade cleaning that is used to spray down and decontaminate every day. And then there would be a thorough deep cleaning by medical environmental professionals that would happen before the school would be open. And in the event that, let's say, if we go back on May 4th or whether it is extended later, there is sufficient time built into the MOU that we have with Tufts to make sure that there's a step down protocol to ensure the safety for students and staff.
And how did that, what was the timing of how the MOU was negotiated? How kind of far in advance before the opening did that start being discussed?
It was a matter of days. So we got word from the city that they were interested in providing the facility to Tufts, to partnering, because we knew that one of the number one things to prevent the spread of the disease is testing. And so it really was a matter of days. I think that we were notified on a Friday and that happened over the weekend and into early the following week. So I can look back and let you know for sure, but it was really days.
Could you share the MOU as well? I would love to see what's in there. I think as many of you all know, and as I've raised on calls with the mayor as well, this site is of particular concern. Sorry, I'm scrolling. I'm on my phone, so I can't see everyone at once. I'm scrolling always to check the chairwoman. I see the gavel is popping up now, so I'm going to wrap up. This site is of particular concern because it is next door to a senior residential building in one of our environmental justice communities. And so, as we've seen historically, that communities of color and residents who are underrepresented are often the first to be places where facilities are cited that have external negative consequences for that community. And Chinatown is already a place that has the highest air pollution in the state that has been documented. We know there's a tight link between exposure to air pollution and vulnerability to COVID to begin with. And now the testing site right next door to where seniors are walking around with very little, outreach from anyone. Certainly, I understand you all were in the exact same boat. But I would just ask here, for you all, as schools are being considered potentially for further sites and to the city at large, that anytime it is a public building, there should be some conversation about what the baseline standards are for safety of the larger community. So anyway, I will respect the gavel and wait for my next round, but thank you very much.
You're on mute, Counselor. Madam Chair. Go.
Thank you. All right. Thank you, Counselor Wu. I will allow Counselor Flynn 30 seconds because he'd really like to add a quick thing on this, but I'll just say that that's only because he was very good about his time.
Thank you. Thank you, Counselor. I just wanted to add a 30-second update. I had the opportunity to talk to the CEO of Tufts Medical last week with Marty Martinez. Both the CEO of Tufts Medical and Marty Martinez guaranteed that the school would be 100% clean and that we would do a walkthrough prior to the opening of school to make sure it is up to standards. So both guaranteed me that it would be up to standards, it will be safe, and both will actually do a walkthrough with me prior to the opening of school. So I just wanted to add that information. I thought it might be helpful for the discussion. Thank you, Counselor.
Thank you, Counselor Flynn, and thank you, Counselor Wu. Next, going to Counselor Mejia at large, to be followed by Counselor Breeden and then Counselor Arroyo.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Superintendent. And I'll be really honest, giving you a little bit of preview that I am going to use all of my 5 minutes and maybe even a little extra time just because in the best interest of equity. So here we go. I have a few questions. One is in regards to, I know I saw on the slides around arts funding for K through 6. I didn't see much discussion happening on the years grades 7 through 12. So I'm wondering what investments are going to be made in the arts in that section, as well as I'm curious, I didn't see much around investments in our libraries in our schools, so just curious to see where that is landing. I have several questions, so I'm going to go through them all and then we can have a back and forth. The next question that I have is right now, what is the budget? Has the budget slides been translated into multiple languages? I know we talk a lot about the importance of language access. Just curious to know whether or not the budget has been translated in various languages so that parents can have access to it. I am really concerned about the fact that for the ELL line item, there's only $400,000 allotted. Just curious how you all are going to manage the need. The other question that I have is around contracting local businesses, particularly businesses of color. I'm curious to see what BPS is planning to do differently in this fiscal year to ensure that we have more minority and women businesses being part of the contracting process. And in relation to the issues of diversity, just curious around what your plan is for the recruitment and retention of teachers of color. One thing is to get teachers of color into our schools. The other is to retain them. Just wondering, as part of your professional development plan, what, how much are you looking into pouring into retention? And then the last question is around special education. I know that you mentioned earlier that that you're spending some money for out of district placement. Just wondering how much that that budget looks like, and wondering whether or not you know what each school is spending for special education. And then one last question in regards to, as we know, because of COVID-19, many of our schools who rely on fundraising to kind of help supplement, just curious as to what role BPS is planning to do to support those schools who weren't able to do any fundraising as a result of COVID-19. You know, and the last thing that I'll say is that I'm a BPS graduate. I went to every single Boston public school you could imagine. I am in many ways the same type of kids that are still sitting in our classrooms, and I'm really concerned about the remote learning, distance learning, and the equity behind that, because we have a lot of kids who are chronically absent, pre-COVID-19 and now are losing more time in the classroom, and just wondering what your strategy is to ensure that when they come back to school, if we ever do go back to school, what is the plan to make up for that loss? Thank you so much.
Okay, so I'm going to get started on answering those. Thank you, Councilor Mejia. I share your concern about learning loss, and it is a top priority for us around the equity. That's why we're convening these equity tables, so that we can be responsive to our community and really get at some of these deeper systemic issues that you've raised. First, around arts, that question, we are focusing on the 33 schools because for two reasons. One, putting those specialists in not only helps us create a more well-rounded, joyous experience for children, but it also provides an extra hour for teachers to be per week to be able to engage in professional learning around their practice so that they can address the inequity. So that's a huge piece. As the year 2 budget, remember I talked about this being year 1, 2, and 3. We want to look to expand the arts in years 2 and 3 as well. And so you're not seeing the full 3-year vision of this budget. You're seeing just 1 year here. So just think about all of these family supports, instructional supports, arts supports, well-rounded education, professional development. All of those things are the expansion and special ed and EL supports are all going to be phased in each of these 3 budgets. And that's what you're seeing right now is phase 1 in the first year of it. So expect more of that. As for libraries, I have a strong value on libraries and a strong history of supporting libraries. But as Nate had already shown in his parity slides, when we do provide the 1.0 nurse or the 1.0 psychologist, the 1.0, anything really, any staff member, it does disproportionately pull off of our equity mission of how we do weighted student funding and focus on our opportunity index. So that's a discussion certainly we can have about libraries and the importance of librarians. And with the COVID response, obviously we know that there are other priorities, competing priorities as well with social workers, psychologists, mental health professionals, housing professionals, all of that. It's just all competing, so it's just a matter of resource. As for the budget and languages, I'll have Nate answer that afterward. I think Nate also has a really good answer about ELL, so I'll let him answer that and why the resources are where they are with ELL because of the way we actually fund our schools with student-weighted funding and our DOJ agreements and obligations. So I'll have him come back to that. Contracting for businesses of color, we're going to be reviewing all of our contracts and looking at our contracts. This is something that when I first became superintendent, I noticed we have a number of contracts and I want to get to the bottom of all of those. It's just having the time in which to do that. But certainly there is a priority to, there is with the city, to look at minority-owned businesses and women-owned businesses to ensure that those are fair practices within our procurement process. Recruitment and retention of teachers of color is a top priority for us. We did a full presentation to the school committee, which I would make available to you. That I know we have 5 minutes here, so I don't want to go on and on about all of the efforts that we've been doing, but we have added staffing positions to this as well as resources. And also it's within our DESE MOU to address teacher diversity and school leader diversity to ensure that we are making our schools as representative as possible. Plus it is a strategic direction of one of our commitments in order to ensure that we're reflective of the cultural and linguistic heritage of our schools and communities that we serve, our students and communities. Then special ed out of district, I'm going to have Nate answer that. Fundraising has been an issue ever since like the first school committee, Miss Vice Chair Alex Olivia Davila has really brought this up as an issue with fundraising. And so she and others on the board have had concerns around the equity that some of our schools have, millions of dollars in their 501c3s and other schools are on GoFundMe pages. So we're trying to get a handle of the fundraising that's happening, and we're doing that through the Resiliency Fund during this COVID response. But we have a larger solution that we're working on right now. I'm not ready to share that yet around fundraising, but it will be part of our strategic direction to be able to more centrally ensure equity for schools around fundraising. And I'll share that with you all a little later when we have that more in stone for what we're going to be doing, so that that's equitable and that schools don't sort of get the short end of the straw because they're not able to get the resources that other schools are. And then attendance back to school. This is part of our phase 2. I'm hoping that we will get agreement with our BTU partners soon this week. And we will be then beginning to take, after spring break, attendance every day. And so we'll have a really good accounting of students, and then we'll be using our student attendance monitors to go and help us with monitoring of chronic attendance and ensuring that we are targeting those students that are not engaging with us and working with them to get them engaged, whether it's they need a Chromebook, whether it's they need Wi-Fi, whether it's just, you know, they need that supportive relationship or mentorship from a caring and loving adult. So we'll be working on how do we continue to get our youth engaged, or whether it's the family needs support and getting the parents the tools and the resources that they need to help them with this remote learning. So that is top of mind in terms of reaching all of our students, is the ability to take the attendance. So Nate, if you could answer the other questions that I threw to you, then we can, then those have answered.
So a couple things I think that you asked about. The first is we don't have translated budget documents available online. So that is something that we certainly can plan for going forward, and appreciate you raising that issue. It's something that's never been raised before. So we'll look at that over the next few months. The question about English learners, where you mentioned that there's only 400K, the 400K is a new investment that we're highlighting around special English learner programs. That's an increase over what is costing to do operations and services for English learners. Overall, on our general fund, there's $101 million going specifically to English learners. That's an increase of $6.2 million over the FY20 budget, and an increase of 52 FTE overall. And so we are making significant investments and continuing to support our English learners. As we've seen decreased enrollment in BPS, we have seen an increased percentage of our students in English learners. And so we continue to work on those programs. So the 400K is just a highlighted investment in academic programs, expansion of dual language, and new English learner programs for the Look Act. It is not our total investment in English learners. You also asked about school by school spending on special education. I think I'm gonna make an attempt here to use our technology to show something that I referenced in our presentation, which was the Explore budget page on BPS. So if you go to bostonpublicschools.org/explore budgets, you'll come to this splash page, which shows our overall budget. At the bottom in the gray boxes here, or ovals here, you can see Explore School Budget, and it will pull up how we both allocate and how schools are spending money. And so here you can see spending by special education. The funding is allocated through weighted student funding and district supports. You can see it on the number of students served, as well as the total cost per pupil for that activity. This is the additive cost of special education allocations. And then if you click up here, it says how money is spent and versus how money is allocated. You can see that in the school budgets, they're allocating out money through whole school supports, teaching, targeted instruction, school supports. So you can really drill down and understand not only overall how school spending is done, but also then how individual schools. And so here at the top, you can drop down and select any one of our many schools. The BTU pilot school, for example, you can see how that specific school is allocating the budget that they received, and you can see how they receive money. The majority of our spending at school and our allocations to schools is driven through weighted student funding. And so you can view those those allocations on our website as well. You also asked about out-of-district special education tuition. We are projecting next year to spend about $41 million total in out-of-district special education. About half of that is anticipated to be reimbursed by the state through what we refer to as circuit breaker. That is the state's mechanism for providing additional reimbursement for cost 4 times the state average in special education. And so we anticipate about half of that coming back to us in that reimbursement. I think the superintendent already addressed the question about contracting, but our business manager, Ed Glora, has been working very closely with our city partners to understand what resources we have to get information about minority and women-owned businesses. We're working on how to provide that information better to schools so that when they make a lot of their individual purchasing decisions, they have access to that list and can leverage that information. I think one of the things that I'm also just reflecting on as we get a series of questions is I think it's important to note that we have a lot of different budget decision makers in the district and a lot of people who are managing spending. With 123 different schools, 60 central office departments, our process of putting a budget together is really a massive coordination across. And that's true when it comes to spending as well. So we need to work with them and monitor spending and pushing things out to our departments and working with them. And so it's about training and support and making tools that are easier for them to access it. I'm also thinking about it in terms of a lot of the questions we've gotten around COVID and the coordination of responses. It also has to do with spending when we think about providing to all of our schools. The decisions we make as a district and as a city overall in terms of the number of schools we operate, the size of those schools that we operate, and how those programming lines up at each of our schools really drives a lot of our challenging, and we create this complexity that we're trying to manage as a district. So I think as we start to make those long-term strategic decisions that aren't just about an annual budget cycle, we need to keep in mind some of the challenges of consistency and equity across the district as we start to evaluate what are the Build BPS decisions or what are the funding decisions that we're making. So I'll end there because that was a little bit of an aside on the basic questions that you were asking. Please let me know if we missed anything on the questions that you asked.
No, thank you. I will yield my time and I look forward to the second round.
There's no time left to yield, Counselor, but thank you so much.
Madam Chair, if I could ask Nate if the document that you shared, is that that's online, right?
Yeah, I went directly live to our website. So that's up and learning, bostonpublicschools.org/explore budget.
I'm wondering that online, does that work with Google Translate or not? Is that the kind of form that works with the Google Translate? David?
We don't currently have a link to Google Translate, but I'll work with our translations team to start thinking about the process for translating our documents and having a lot of our budget information translated.
Right, but I saw David shaking his head, and I'm wondering, when you go on Google Translate, you can translate all the forms, and so I'm wondering if this particular form will work with the technology. So let's just double check and see if the Google Translate option does work with this one. Until we do have all of the documents translated. Not that it would replace us translating our more permanent documents, but on these dynamic documents that we have, is it eligible? Does it work?
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Superintendent. And thank you, Nate. That I would definitely commend the Budget Explorer to everyone. I think all of the counselor's staff has it. And now I'm going to recognize Counselor Liz Breeden to be followed by Counselor Arroyo and then Counselor Asabi George. I do just want to note also, I neglected right at the start to say that we had also been joined by Counselor Lydia Edwards and Counselor Frank Baker. So I'm grateful to the entire council for attending this hearing. Counselor Breeden.
Thank you. Thank you for all your work. The team put together a really comprehensive presentation this morning. I had particular questions about English language learning and special ed at schools like Brighton High, where 65% of the student body fall in those categories. In terms of your instructional philosophy and resources, how can you address I think it's a real significant factor, as well as poverty and unstable housing, in the achievement in a school like Brighton High. Are there particular strategies that you're using to address that disparity?
Councillor Breeden, I have Brighton High as one of our top priority high schools to reform. And so next year will be a planning year for Brighton High School in 2021 school year for the full redesign effort in 21-22, and we will be considering all of that when we begin to do these redesigns. And so love to have your partnership in that as we begin to think about that and as we move forward with Brighton High. And some of those announcements will probably be forthcoming in the next couple of months.
Yeah, thank you. Like yourself, when I came in, I tried to visit as many of the different schools, and then COVID intervened and I didn't get to visit all the people I wanted to see. I really applaud your support for the hub school model. We have the Gardner Pilot School, which is really a gem in our community here. The other question I have was with regard to the plans for the Jackson Man and Horace Man. Could you outline the process? You know, they're slated to close next July in June 21. In terms of, you know, the process of how we can engage in that process and the funding that can be secured to have a comprehensive community process in the planning for what's going to happen there with the schools and the community centre.
Yeah, Councillor Breeden, I'm going to have Nate Cooter take that question, but I do know that we just did a survey of the staff. We had several town hall meetings already out with the Jackson Man and the Horseman community, both individually and together, prior to COVID, and we were launching a survey. And I know that we launched that survey and we then extended the survey, and I think there was a relaunch too, just last week at the recommendation of a community member. So I'll let Nate talk a little bit about where we're at with Build BPS.
Thank you.
Yeah, we have in our budget for Build BPS a couple different items that we talked about. One is transition supports. That one of the things that we've started to do more intentionally is, as we've started to transition schools and deal with schools that are really dealing with our policy changes as a district, most notably the K-6 expansion and the impact on the middle schools, we've started to provide supplemental funding. And so the Jackson Man in particular, what we've been doing is really monitoring them and working with them on their budget as we start to look at the shifts that they've gone through as we start to deal with the school building. We have also set aside money in our budget, and we've partnered with PSD, the Public Facilities Department, around community engagement. So we have resources available to us to do community engagement, including the survey that the superintendent mentioned that we've launched to get information from the Jackson Man community. I think one of the things that we're grappling with under our current conditions is how much engagement can we do sort of authentically at this time, and how much do we really need to wait until school is back and opened, and for people to sort of get through this current. On one hand, we've seen at our school committee hearings, a lot more people log in online and have access to it, but we just want to be aware that we're not sort of being biased by information coming from particular groups who have access and groups that don't. And so I think that the resource that we have, we're spending time to think about how do we engage with those communities. I know the Horace Man and the Jackson Man has been a continued partnership and engagement with them, and we continue to work with those school leaders very deliberately to make sure that we're crafting a plan that works for the students and the families.
I also, at the Edison, the Edison School, they have a behavioral support program over there that I heard a presentation at a community meeting recently by one of the teachers involved. And it seems to be working very well in terms of young students who have got behavioural issues. With the behavioural supports, they're able to be mainstreamed back into regular classrooms again. Are there particular budget items identified to support that sort of initiative?
Yeah, I think there are a couple of things. The program that you're referring to for students with different emotional issues. We refer to it as programs for students with emotional impairment. And there's both externalizing behaviors, students who may be aggressive or who are more expressive in their behavioral issues, and then internalizing, which is an example of that could be a student who has self-injurious behavior, that's not or may have anxiety disorders, things like that. So there are different programs. The Edison has a program for EI externalizing. I think they're doing great work, and we're really spending a lot of time to think about how do we create more inclusive opportunities for students, particularly students in emotional impairment programs. It's a high need. It's something that Superintendent Caselius has been talking about since, I can't even say since day one, because she showed up in Boston before day one and immediately started talking about how can we deconstruct the number of substantially separate programs that we have, particularly for students in emotional impairment programs. And we have examples of that being done well. Certainly, the Edison is doing great work in including their students. The Manning in JP is a school that we sort of highlight as having taken a program and dismantling it and providing more inclusive opportunities. I shouldn't have started to name schools because I think there's great work being done across the district for students. That funding comes in a couple different ways. The first is the weighted student funding. Those programs are some of our highest per pupil funding allocations. We also have, and David will talk about this more this afternoon in our schools hearing, but we've published online a list of supplemental support that schools get. This is funding outside of weighted student funding. For emotional impairment programs, we provide program coordinators, special education program coordinators, and clinicians to be able to provide mental health supports for those students and social workers for those students, over and above the investment in social workers that we've been talking about at our 33 transformation schools for next year. And then, of course, the special education department has been thinking very deliberately about how do we provide better training and technical support to schools about inclusive practices, what it really means to provide inclusive opportunities throughout the school day, and build on student strengths for inclusion. I think that's a big part of our budget in the special education department. Our hearing for special education, we do have a specific hearing about that, and we'll talk about that in terms of eliminating opportunity achievement gaps, and then also in terms of accelerating our learning, those commitments from the strategic plan.
Very good. I'll hold more questions for that time. The other question I had was with regard to the Winship School. Are there any plans to increase that, to make that a K through 6, to expand that? Many of the present cohort of parents are very interested in having a K through, make it a 6th grade in that school, especially with the uncertainty around the Jackson Man and what's going to happen over there.
Yeah, we've announced plans that we ultimately want to be in a place where all of our schools are either K to 6 or K to 8 on the elementary level, and either 7 through 12 or 9 through 12 at the secondary level. So we are working very rapidly. There's nobody putting pressure on us more than Superintendent Caselius to really get to a place where we have sort of simplified our grade configurations across. The Winship is a place that we are evaluating for K to 6. For any of our K to 5s that don't currently have a 6th grade, the question is what existing space is in the building. You mentioned the Jackson Man as a complicating factor for families. It's also a complicating factor for us as a district as we think about where do we have available space in Brighton if we should offer families opportunities in Brighton other than the Jackson Man, if we need to potentially move into swing space, and all the different things that we're considering. So, we do anticipate that once we get back to some semblance of normal following COVID, that families will begin to ask us again about K to 6 expansion. But I just want to note that anytime we add 6th grades at the K to 5, that it will have an impact on our standalone middle schools. It will have an impact on some of our K to 8s as well. And so we're trying to coordinate what is the right sort of balance of that. And then how do we, if you expand all of our remaining schools to K to 6, you are effectively closing middle schools. And so we want to do that in a way that is supportive of those students in the middle schools and in those middle school communities, so that it's not just sort of leaving them to sort of wither on the vine, if you will.
Very good. How am I doing for time there?
I'm afraid you're well over, Counselor. So.
Oh, sorry. Thank you so much. I have more questions. I'll ask them in another session. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Counselor Arroyo, to be followed by Counselor Asabi George and then Counselor O'Malley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. A number of my questions have already been asked, but one of my concerns about the response to COVID-19 is that a lot of the reports that we've gotten say that worst case scenario, this might be a situation that goes into the fall or might reoccur, and we might be doing a series of kind of stops and starts. As we plan for that in this budget, obviously, I think everybody in terms of school closures and all the things that we had to kind of scramble to get into place for stay-at-home learning, we've hopefully learned from. And hopefully, if we do go into that kind of a situation, the resources in terms of the Chromebooks and kind of the experience of this situation helps stabilize that somewhat. But are we creating, and this is kind of a two-part question, so let me ask it this way. I think most people believe that we're probably still going to be in this situation come the summer, right? June, July, August, we're still going to be somewhat dealing with the repercussions. And then there's some conversation as to whether or not it goes into the next school year. But as we talk about summer learning and trying to catch folks up in the summer, there's a very good chance that that summer learning is done remotely. And so the question is, what part of this budget has gone towards creating sort of a remote education curriculum or a way to do that and implementing that as it would be put into effect both for the summer and, if necessary, for the start of the next school year? And two, is there a way to create, I graduated law school and took the bar in 2014, but most of the way I studied for that, and most attorneys study for that, is through visual, similar to what Masterclass is doing in the sense that they do videos on a specific topic, and then they train this curriculum, and instead of having a whole bunch of teachers address a whole bunch of folks individually, you kind of have this curriculum laid out by master teachers or teachers who are really good at remote learning that is used for that grade level. Is there any consideration to trying to create something similar for our higher grades, for our seniors and our juniors and our sophomores, the folks who could do some of that independent learning in that way? Those are two questions. So first, just what's the plan for remote learning for the summer to get folks up to speed? And if necessary, if this is business as usual for the start of next year, kind of onboarding new classes, figuring out all of that. How does this budget prepare for those kind of technical needs?
So we are planning on the summer learning piece now and what that's going to look like, whether it's remote, whether it's some sort of blended in-person and not in-person model, or whether it's more traditional in nature. So we're looking at all of that and planning for that. We do think that there will be some federal stimulus dollars that will come to help us with some of that remote learning and e-learning costs, as well as some of the other costs associated with learning loss. This budget is the budget for 2021, and I'll have Nate talk to the aspects within it that are specific to summer learning. And as for the academic suggestions that you gave, yes, we are looking at those similar kinds of video delivery. We have delivery on BNN of content. We have opportunities with some partners like Advanced Placement, and the College Board, and some other types of software programs that are available to our students that are not just teacher directed. So there's a blend of many different modalities that are being delivered now to deliver the remote learning. We're looking at those best practices and having teachers share those through a new system that we're getting ready to engage with. So Nate?
Yeah, I would just add, I think, what we've seen is from a number of of the technology providers in the education space that they have thankfully provided a number of new resources that we're using with our teachers. I just think it's difficult, particularly at the high school level. And one of the things that we're looking at, and you'll see it in the high school investment around this idea of Math Core and some standard offerings for schools and for students at each school. Part of that is bringing a consistent level of expectations on what content is being delivered in high schools. And I think that's only compounded in situations like this, where when we start to think about high school content in even the most basic of subjects, and by basic of subjects, I mean like biology chemistry, those things that are offered in many of our schools, the content and where students are in their scope and sequence at this time of year is very different. And so when we start thinking about sort of consistent expectations across schools, it sort of comes in sort of conflict with some of our traditions around autonomy and our practices around autonomy. But I do think if you haven't seen our online resources, the Andrea Zayas and her team have delivered now 6 weeks of content online for families. It's high quality and culturally, linguistically sustaining content that is, I couldn't help but notice that Arnie Duncan had retweeted her link and given kudos to the district as sort of, is an example of us really pushing forward creatively. I do think to a certain extent, a lot of these questions are the right questions. We are exploring them. We as a finance team are trying to create flexibility for the academics team to be able to come to us and say, okay, this is what we want to do in summer learning. We're working with the city, and of course, we're looking at the federal stimulus packages to understand what resources we have available. And 80% of our budget goes directly in people and staff, and a lot of that money is in schools, so they'll need to be available as we start to think about what are the resources that we need to reallocate towards shifting our strategy that we had in place. So, I don't have a really tight answer in terms of distance learning and summer learning, but that's because we're rapidly trying to create a flexible plan to say, how do we deal with this? Is this the standard way that we need to approach education, where we need to have the flexibility to be remote and in person? Do we need flexibility in our schedule? As a district, in our school calendar as a district? I think these are big questions that we're trying to sort of grapple with and address in our budget.
I think one other question just on the COVID-19 stance. Let me just take a quick look. I got to swipe over to make sure that I don't have a gavel up. All right. So one quick question on the COVID issue. Sorry, I'm muted. So one last question on the COVID issue. If we reopen in the fall with certain social distancing guidelines, things of that nature, that'll obviously affect classroom size. If we're trying to actually implement social distancing within the schools, if the schools are back in place at that time, is there anything in the budget to address the fact that may require more teachers or a difference in our schedules? Or is there anything for that if we reopen, but we reopen with certain physical distancing or certain guidelines that require less kids to be in classrooms?
I don't think that we can safely open schools with social distancing for children.
So in other words, if we reopen, but it's like
children cannot be depended upon to socially distance. I just don't know how that would be even possible, quite honestly. So basically, unless it's completely safe for our children to go back without social distancing, I don't know how we could do that, because you get little kindergartners, first graders, third graders together. They're obviously going to want to hug each other and be close to each other. And, the physical proximity of a school classroom, is 30 feet by 50 feet or whatever it is. It's just, I don't see how a teacher could manage that with 10 kids. And I'm not sure it would be socially, emotionally correct for our children to be in that kind of environment. So that would not be my recommendation.
So basically, from the sound of it, what I'm hearing is, if we were in a situation where society more or less was reopening, but was reopening with conditions like social distancing and wearing masks, and essentially it was a sort of a soft reopen, if you will, schools wouldn't be able to open up under that kind of a situation, so they would continue to be closed.
My best advice would be that for child psychology purposes and for the purposes of normal schooling, that remote learning would be a better way to do it at that point. I'm just not certain that would be what all decision makers would make. But I just think that would be extremely challenging to do. It might be able to do at the higher levels, middle and high school, where you could maybe keep kids more separated, but with the younger children, I think that would be very challenging. I see.
Thank you. I see the gavel.
Smiling as a former teacher.
Thank you.
I see the gavel. So thank you all.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Arroyo. Recognizing next Councillor Asabi George, followed by Councillor Matt O'Malley. Go ahead.
Thank you, Chairman Bach, and thank you, everyone here, Dr. Caselius and Nate and David and Shelley and everyone else from BPS who's here. I'm sorry that I was present for the presentation with Nate and with Dr. Caselius. I did get off of the hearing to participate in a call with the mayor and a number of our family shelter providers, and we spent a lot of that time talking about our families and their needs right now. And part of that call, the providers expressed their gratefulness to the district for the food distribution, for the Chromebooks, and still recognizing that there are some challenges getting our most vulnerable families, our families experiencing homelessness, some of the things that they need for their kids and their families to be successful at this time. And I want to especially thank Brian Marks, who's been an active participant in my roundtables, working around families experiencing homelessness, and the effort and the collaboration that needs to happen between the city and the district and the housing authority to make sure that our families have all of the things that they need during that time. So just get my thank yous out, and we'll talk more about that in the future hearing. I do want to ask my questions, and Jessica Rodriguez, my chief of staff, has been following, so gave me some pretty good notes about what's been covered so far, what I missed. My questions at this moment are two different questions. One, something that I worked on last year and the year before, and happy that we have now full-time nurses in all of our schools. I'd like to just have an update on that. Where are we? Because I know that there was a few schools outstanding for that full-time nurse. And then my second question, unrelated, is around Build BPS and the need for a Build BPS Part 2. So, you know, that initial $1 billion investment is so important to our school district, and a lot of that money has been spent or has been accounted for. I am curious about any longer term planning that needs to happen for a Build BPS Part 2. So those are my questions for whoever wants to take that. And I also see that Dr. Granson is on here too. I just want to thank him for his continued work on behalf of the district, and just, you know, it's a whole lot of thank yous that will continue, just sort of generally, not just in this time of crisis. Thank you, Chair Bach.
Yeah, thank you, Counselor. Nate, do you have the update on the school nurses, or do we need to just get that from Al Taylor quickly?
I'm actually going to kick the nurse question over to David. I will just briefly take the Build BPS question. I think, you know, last year we published what we referred to as a phase 2 of Build BPS. I think you're referring to not just this 10 years, but the 10 years after, beyond that. I think one of the things that we've been thinking about is really, and you've heard me say this before in public meetings, that getting onto a cycle where it's not just that the school building projects are, you know, sort of ad hoc or sort of slow moving. I think all of these projects take multiple years. The Quincy Upper School is probably one of the toughest examples of how long it can take to identify an appropriate parcel, get all the stakeholders involved, and get a project going. And so one of the things that happened, and it, you know, BPS did not have a strategic capital plan in place that said, these are the next 5 projects that are in the queue, so that when funding becomes available, staff becomes available, and that's part of the charge the mayor has given us with Build BPS, is not just to do our accelerated repairs and not just do the basic nuts and bolts, which we've been doing at great volume, but also then put a plan in place so that we're on a predictable cycle. And so we're starting to think about how do we map out the next, I think we still have 5 or 6 years of Build BPS of that 10, that originally $1 billion commitment. We're also starting to scope out and work with the city on what does it look beyond that, because some of the projects that we're going to be, those seeds we're going to be planting in the ground right now really won't be funded and be part of that $1 billion. It'll be in the next phase. So that is something that we are working actively on, and it's something that we know that all of our buildings are so out of date. You know, with half of them being built before World War II, those are all buildings that ultimately need to come offline and replaced with higher quality buildings. And to Councilor Breeden's comment about Jackson Man, we want to be in a place where we're taking buildings offline well before they're creating a building emergency, that we are, and schools can know this is when the Murphy School is going to be upgraded. This is when the Quincy School is going to be upgraded. This is when the Winthrop is going to be upgraded. People know what that schedule is and getting way out ahead of it. So that's part of our work. As for the nursing question, I'm going to kick it over to David because he has that information for you.
Yep. So in regards to the nursing, we are being careful not to disrupt nursing supports at existing schools as we expand. So right now, coming into the year before we implemented, a number of schools were sharing a full-time nurse. When we then increase those nursing positions to full-time, the nurse can choose which school they have a preference towards. And we want to make sure that we then have a replacement nurse ready to go for the school that isn't chosen, so that no school experiences disruption in nursing services through that. At the moment, there are 14 schools that are still sharing a nurse, but one of the things we've done in addition is have additional coverage nurses available to support the transition this year. I will say outside of those 14 schools, we still have some of the traditional vacancy and leave issues that we have. So there are schools outside that 14 that have a full-time nurse position, but may not have a full-time nurse in position yet, as we're still in the middle of hiring. But all schools are set up to be in compliance by the start of school in the fall. And we're currently very actively working on hiring for those positions, though our nursing team obviously has a couple other things going on right now as well.
Great, I appreciate that, both of those things. And I'm concerned certainly about the time, and I know that we have a second hearing this afternoon, and then our topic hearings, but things that I look forward to hearing about and discussing in greater detail and getting into the weeds, again, not just, I chair the Council's Committee on Education. I'm a former BPS teacher and a BPS parent. So I have, some real interest and look forward to the deeper dives around our special education, around our inclusion programs, around social and emotional learning as we've moved to full-time nurses in all of our buildings. I really look to moving to full-time emotional and behavioral health supports in our schools, and appreciate the increase in the number of social workers in all of our schools. I also look forward to a deeper conversation at a future hearing around vocational education and our investment in particular at Madison Park, as well as I'm a big proponent and supporter, as I know Dr. Caselius is, around BPS athletics. So that's sort of just skimming the top around some of the things I look forward to in the coming weeks and months ahead, and appreciate and applaud Dr. Caselius' leadership during this emergency that we're facing as a city and her stewardship of our district. Thank you, Chairman Bach. I see the gavel is up. I'm going to go back to mute now. Thank you.
I just wanted to say, Counselor, if I could quickly, that these issues are top of mind for us around the mental health and nursing supports and the hub school model in general. And we're really going to be able to leverage some of that, hopefully with some of this COVID response funding that we get. And I think also some of the athletics, some of the additional counselors, some of the additional work that we'll be doing with our high schools to get at your previous questions that will be coming are more in the alignment with the year 2 budget. And so I just want to, remind everyone that this is a 3-year budget, and the first year was really to focus on the low-performing schools, and now it will be also to focus on some of the COVID responses to support families and the learning loss. But I think that second year will be really a focus on our secondary schools and the secondary portion of the high school redesign.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Superintendent. Recognizing now Councilor Matt O'Malley, to be followed by Council President Kim Janey, Councilor Lydia Edwards, and finally Councilor Frank Baker.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Superintendent, how are you?
I'm good, thanks. How are you?
Good. I'm
I had to get up and stretch.
No, I don't blame you, and it's good. But seriously, I really value the leadership you and your team have demonstrated. This is obviously uncharted territory for any of us, and the magnitude of what we are trying to do cannot be underestimated. So I'm very grateful for your leadership, as I've said to you privately and now publicly, and just take care of yourself. Make sure you get, I know you're an athlete and you probably don't have time to get, well, there's no ice time happening now, but make sure you take 15 minutes to meditate or breathe or just relax. But I'm very grateful for what all of you have been doing. There's no question that, I've had criticism of BPS in the past, and I will have criticism of BPS in the future, but I know each and every one of you on this call and those who are currently working are doing everything you can to not only make sure that everything we do puts student safety and health first, but that we're methodical and we recognize the fact that these are gears next to one another. When we eventually reopen schools, be it this school year or the next school year, there are other ramifications that will depend on that as it relates to transportation, health, workforce. They're all complementary gears. So none of us have lost sight of that or will lose sight of that. But I just wanted to say a real heartfelt thank you on behalf of the people of Boston for you and your team, Superintendent. So number of questions. I'm going to keep mine to 5 minutes. I'm timing myself out of respect of everyone else's time. But the issues I want just to briefly touched upon, and I know we'll get into more specificity with the subsequent hearings that come, but I guess this is one that makes sense to start with. Obviously support the call to cancel the MCAS this year. It couldn't be done well, and I think many of us have issues with MCAS as it's been implemented. A question I have, because I'm cognizant of my nephew who's at the O'Brien, who scored advanced on a number of, not all, but some of the categories. Obviously, the John and Abigail Adams scholarships are determined upon a student's scoring advanced or higher, or advanced or proficient or higher on certain tests. I don't think it would be a large universe, but I'm sure there are some students who wouldn't have the opportunity to take that MCAS and then receive the scholarship to a state university. So has there been any accommodations made for those students?
I think we're going to have to figure out what measures would be used for that scholarship. I'm still just learning about that scholarship. It was brought to my attention as well. So I'll need to address that with the team and get back to you.
Yeah. And again, I don't think it's a particularly large universe of students, but I'm thinking of issues like that where we obviously made the right call to postpone something or to cancel something, but there'll be other things, there's likely not going to be a senior prom for Boston Public School students. That's terribly sad, but that's understandable given where we're at. Graduation may have to be done remotely for certain schools, for certain students. That's obviously disappointing and sad, but understandable. But there are other things that we need to prepare for which can't be moved or canceled or will have ramifications if we don't hold them. So I guess, can you just talk briefly about how we're addressing some of those student metric measurements?
Yeah, so we are waiting on some of the competency determination guidance from the commissioner still yet. Even though the MCAS has been, postponed or canceled, there still is the graduation requirements, and we're still waiting on guidance from the commissioner on that to be able to determine all of the graduation requirements that we're going to need to hold to. But we have already started to prepare and started to look at students who were not on track for graduation, look at students who were credit deficient. We've looked at their MCAS history, and we have a number of students, and we're beginning to work with our high school team and counselors around how we're going to address those deficiencies for each and every student so that they can still earn their diploma. So we're on track for doing that. As for the proms and the graduations, we don't have a good answer for that yet. I have weekly meetings with the Boston Student Advisory Council, and they're mixed, and they're wanting to have an online graduation or whether to have wait for one in person. You know, they're worried that the in-person one will be delayed too much because kids will have to go off to the Air Force Academy, for instance, or off to enlisted service or off to college, and they wouldn't then be there to be able to do it. So we're looking at options of some sort of blended possibility, and that's still just more information to come on that.
Okay, no, fair enough. And I know that it underscores the complexity of everything we're dealing with. Nate, I think you had answered the question about the out-of-district placement is going to be about $41 million this year. Do you recall offhand what it was last year?
I don't have that. I'm looking over to see if David has that readily available. I think we could get that information for you fairly easily.
We're projecting about a 3% increase. We're not projecting an increase in number of students. It's just the state rate.
Sure.
Yeah, the state publishes a rate increase every year, and it's an estimate at this point.
Yeah. And getting 20 and a half.
One of the things that I'm looking at in the overall special ed approach that we will be taking is also looking at how do we service more of our students in Boston Public Schools rather than have them have services provided outside of the district. So that is part of the equation as we begin to look at the opportunities for our Boston students for their services.
You took the words right out of my mouth, Superintendent, so I'm gratified to hear that. We've seen this number grow exponentially in the last 10 years, and it's for a whole host of reasons, but obviously the investment in service, and I know we all share this, so I'm preaching to the choir, but servicing all of our students, the upfront cost, which will be significant, but in order to service all of our students will be dwarfed in comparison to the $41 million. And just to follow up on that, the $20.5 million that's likely to be reimbursed through the circuit breaker account, do we know what the reimbursement rate was for last year's out of district placement?
I can look up the numbers and get them to you.
That would be helpful. And again, we can sort of save that more for sort of a specific hearing, but that's sort of along the line of my questions. The gavel is up. I will pause for now. Thank you all for your good work. Be safe.
Thank you, Councilor O'Malley. Council President Janey now has the floor, to be followed by Councilor Lydia Edwards and then Councilor Frank Baker.
Thank you so much. Can everyone hear me? I want to make sure my mute is off. Wonderful. So thank you, Superintendent. Thank you to members of your team, Dave, Nate. I think I saw Charles, yes, there, and everyone who has contributed to putting this budget together. Many of the points that I care about have been raised by colleagues, or at least touched upon by colleagues. Those who know me on the council, and you'll certainly know soon, Superintendent, that I care deeply about the opportunity and achievement gaps in BPS that are persistent, and so would want to frame my questions on how this budget eliminates those gaps. I think I'll just go through a dump of what's on my mind and then let people respond so that I don't run out of time. So I noticed in the $9 million investment in engagement, which I support wholeheartedly. I think that is so important. Parents as true partners in the education of their children. It's something that I've advocated for before in the past when I worked at MAC. Looks very similar to the family community outreach coordinators that we had. I don't know if that was maybe 10 years ago. Folks were around on your team back then. They remember many of us advocated for those positions. I didn't see anything in that $9 million investment on engagement around language access. So I wonder if you could speak to if there is additional investment around connecting with families who may have language needs. And I know the plan to hire, I'm sure will include diverse hires who speak multiple languages, which would be great, but that's one question. The $21 million investment for transformational schools. Again, I've been around, advocating around education for a number of years, close to 20 years now. We've seen different iterations, superintendent schools, we've seen turnaround schools, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm wondering how transformational, we can put a new title on it, but how is that different? On On the social emotional learning, very important. We've been talking about self-care. I wonder what advice we're giving to educators and to parents about how we talk to young people about this, how we're talking about COVID and not getting caught up in the blame and the shame around COVID, how we are not overwhelming, particularly our youngest children, around being just fearful. With people, tens of thousands of people dying all over the globe, I imagine that this is really scary. I'm deeply concerned about IEPs and making sure that students with disabilities are getting their services met. Matt just raised questions around graduations and proms. I think that is important. I'd like to understand if that's more of a school-by-school approach. I think I heard some of your response there, Superintendent. Chromebooks continue to be an issue. I'd like to really understand at what date all kids will have them. I'd like to understand where we are in the delivery right now, whether and where they've been distributed in terms of by zip code, how many folks are logging in, what are the challenges around getting attendance. I want to understand more around summer learning opportunities at this late date, April 13th, 14th, wherever we are. In my mind, it's pretty clear that we have to have summer learning opportunities, and we have to think about summer learning opportunities in a different kind of way. It's not just what we did in the past, but we have to understand, despite the best efforts of our educators to do remote learning and the best efforts of our parents to support their children while they're home during this time, remote learning is certainly not the same, and we can anticipate that there will be even more gaps, that the gaps will be widened. So I'd like to have a serious conversation about what summer learning will look like for 2020. Then, of course, the investments around arts, dual language is big for me, early college, 8th grade algebra, all of those pieces where we're talking about the opportunity gap. I'd like to see where the investment is there. Teacher diversity is really important to me, and I heard that mentioned earlier in the hearing, so just like to understand how this budget supports that. And then certainly on the city contracts, there is a lot more that needs to be done, and I look forward to working with the administration around doing a better job in terms of contracting with businesses owned by people of color and women and locally owned businesses. So why don't I just pause there in case I have some follow-up. I see Kenzie, the chairwoman, just turned her camera back on, so I'm worried that the gavel will raise its ugly head. So if you guys want to go ahead and respond, and if I have some follow-up, hopefully I'll get it in, and if not, during this round, I will save it for the next. Thank you so much, Madam Chair.
Well, President Janey, thank you for all of those concerns. It's the reason why we really focused these hearings and worked with Chairwoman Bach to focus them around the strategic plan, because so much of what you brought up is really in our strategic direction. And I'm looking forward through the series of all of these hearings, answering all of your questions. I know 5 minutes isn't enough for the number of questions, and I know you didn't expect me to answer them all. You just want us to be able to have that as on our radar so that we can discuss them over the series of these hearings that we have. And so I very much appreciate Chairwoman Bach's working with us to arrange it around the strategic agenda, because I think that that's really going to provide the substance that I think the City Council is looking for, and the assurance really to vote for this budget. So I appreciate the focus on equity, as you know, and as we've been developing our relationship, President Janey, as Roxbury residents together, this is a huge priority in terms of our communities and the zip code in which they live. And so we see it front and center right here in our own community, the inequities and how they're affecting our community as well as across the whole city of Boston. So I think it's really important that we continue to address these over these series of hearings, and we answer these questions very directly. Another place that I would like to invite you all to come is our weekly equity roundtable. And I know I've seen you in attendance there, President Janie and a number of other counselors have attended these. This is where we're going to be doing the problem solving. This is where we're going to be presenting our dashboards and holding ourselves accountable and trying to really rethink this, the way that we do education. There are a number of things that have been brought to our attention. Just today, Counselor Mejia bringing to us our attention around translating our budget documents and how we can better meet that is an important feedback for us. And so we look for your partnership in doing that. So I hope that you will be okay with us deferring on a number of these questions and answers throughout the series. Are there any particular ones that you are really wanting us to answer right now before?
Yes, that would be great. And I'm happy to defer when we get into the hearings. We can go deeper for sure. But I am particularly interested in just where we are in the Chromebooks. I know some of my colleagues raised this earlier. If I may have missed it, so I apologize. If you could just walk us through where we are in terms of what percentage of students actually have them, I think, and then where they are in terms of zip codes and what the plan is to get 100%. And then it's not just the Chromebooks, it's the hotspots, it's about who's logging in, et cetera, et cetera. If you could kind of just focus in on those in case I missed it from before. Thank you.
Yeah, let me grab. We have, as of today, we have over 28,237 Chromebooks, 3,300 hotspots. We have a number of hotspots that just came in that we are going to be delivering and getting out to our communities. We've had 31,000, I think 149, I don't have my glasses on, logins. That happened just yesterday. So, and 3,453 teachers logged in the past 7 days. It's about 78% of our teachers. And so, we have a number of efforts that are happening there with logins, and we get stronger every week as we hold ourselves accountable and as school leaders are getting their schedules together. We are working on phase 2 now, where we are going to be starting to take attendance to monitor engagement. I had mentioned that earlier today in the hearing. And so those efforts are moving on.
This is the first time I'm hearing that 100% of teachers are not logging in. So I assume that the login challenge was on the student end. Are we saying now that there's a login challenge on the educator end? And I see the gavel is up, so I want to be mindful. I know there are a couple more colleagues who want to speak, but I just heard you say 78% of teachers logged in yesterday. Is that?
They've logged in the past 7 days, and they have logged into their Clever or their Google Classroom. There may be some high school teachers that are providing their instruction in different ways for remote learning, but that's a number of teachers who have logged in terms of their Google Classroom and their Clever.
I see. I'm gonna wait for the next round. Thank you so much, Madam Chair.
I just got a text from all but 84 teachers have logged in. So of our 4,500 teachers, all but 84 have logged in.
Do we know about those 84?
I do not.
Wait, I'm sorry, Madam Chair.
But I will definitely just know I would like you to know, President Janey, that we are getting these data dashboards up. We are looking at this data and we are following through and holding ourselves accountable. So these are all new data systems that we are putting together to hold our school leaders and ourselves accountable for ensuring that everybody's logging in and that we are getting, the right information, because a number of our teachers, social workers, psychologists, et cetera, paraprofessionals are communicating in multiple ways. And so we're now just being able to gather that data. We've never been in a remote learning environment before. And so it's how do we gather this data and get the right data? Nate?
Can I just add a couple of quick clarifications on the Chromebook distribution? The number of Chromebooks distributed so far is actually up 36 since the start of this hearing. So we continue to increase our efforts to get Chromebooks in the hands of students. Our plan is not to distribute Chromebooks to 100% of students in the district, but to make sure that we have students who have access online. I point that out because I have 2 BPS students in my house that will not be receiving Chromebooks, but they're accessing their content online. So it's not everyone that needs it. When we look across a number of different demographic groups, including race. There's a higher percentage of Latinx, Black, and Native American students than the district. Their higher percentage have received Chromebooks than white students. A higher percentage of English learners have received it than non-English learners, and a higher percentage of students with disabilities have received it than non-students. So we are making an intentional effort to deliver those to students who are highest needs, and 43% of our students overall have received a Chromebook to date. So that's part of the effort that the team has been making across all schools.
One other point, if we dig into who are these 84, we think that some of them are also long-term maternity leaves, other types of leaves. So that's why the data is still a little raw and we're getting to the bottom of it.
Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much. Thank you.
Thank you, Council President. Thank you, Superintendent. I'm glad we'll be having lots of hearings, so we'll have many opportunities to continue these conversations. I want to now recognize Councillor Lydia Edwards to be followed by Councillor Frank Baker.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much. I just wanted to I don't know how you got a gavel, Councillor Bach. I've been using my water bottle as my in and out, but just wanted to note that since we're talking equity and all that stuff, I don't know how you're the one who got a gavel in your house. But that being said, I don't want to eat up my 5 minutes. I've been waiting for them. Just wanted to discuss specifically at the District 1 level, and then also at the whole entire district BPS level. With regards to the entire BPS level, I'm curious about the lessons we're learning now in terms of how this remote learning and these Chromebooks are going to actually enhance the infrastructure and the needs or meeting the needs of learning going forward. I think that these are tools in the toolbox, and I'm curious how all these lessons are being recorded. If they are you archiving them to make sure that they're available for later time? Are all the teachers making sure to archive their lessons as kids do miss or don't miss school or are late to class? The ability to catch up and watch a lesson after the fact, I think, is something that we should consider holding on to going forward for the rest of BPS, for all your years going forward, and possibly even having some of those lessons translated or available for the parents to be able to also help educate and continue to work with their children at home. So I just think it's an infrastructure question and lessons that we're learning. I'll just keep going on. The question I have, and I've consistently had about equity and transportation. I know we've done the rounds on the individual bus from Charlestown to Dorchester schools, or to BLA. But at some point, maybe not today, we should talk about the Owens lot and the continued contract there and how we're going to work through that to make sure that the contracts end and we can save some valuable resources. Again, it doesn't have to happen right today. It's very specific, very in the district. And I know, Nathan, you've been working on it. I know everyone's been working on that. So I acknowledge that work. For other people's education, the superintendent and I spoke very briefly about the Kaleidoscope program yesterday at length, because my entire district is now in the Kaleidoscope program. And so my concern, of course, is that, are we setting up standards? Is this a Trojan horse? Is this really the state now being able to come and monitor us closer than they ever did before? And, the states promise us resources all the time. And we don't have a clear number on what those resources are to help District 1 schools. We're hopeful that this is a positive thing, but, and this is not a critique of the BPS's side and hope for Kaleidoscope. This is more of my concerns about the state not fulfilling its promises and really being able to just monitor and critique at a different level and really provide nothing else besides monitoring and more eyes and criticism. So I wanted to also just make sure we're clear on the on the timelines for District 1 we talked about this yesterday, Superintendent, but if you can say again, this year, our plan, COVID provided, right, is for all at EastD to go to 6. The following school year is for the high schools to meet the 7 and up. The following school year, or ish in between that time, the McKay and any other school that's at 8th grade will eventually go to 6 in East Boston. So that's kind of a District 1. So it's a lot, but thank you so much.
Yeah, so thank you for your comments, Counselor. The goal is to get to K-6 in East Boston and Charlestown Community. The two high schools will be going 7 through 12 in 21-22. As for the K-8s, I don't know if those will go down grades or not. It will be dependent on the space in the high schools and options, and that's a conversation still yet to have with the community. I have not discussed K-8s at all as part of Build PPS yet. We've been prioritizing the K-6 expansion and the 7-12 expansion first before the K-8, 9-12. So that's been our priority. As for Kaleidoscope and the DESE, we did have extensive conversation yesterday, you and I, about that project. It appears that year one, they will provide resources for the project. It is going to be a smaller implementation, I think, than what they had originally planned, with installing leadership teams and providing about 5 to 6 hours of professional development to teachers over the whole entire year. But then that leadership team will get up to 20 hours of professional development for about 5 to 6 individuals, and they will begin that work. And I think the high school work for early college and acceleration academies would happen year 2 and year 3 of the project.
Just real quick on that expansion, are we going to get a study for East Boston and Charlestown ahead of their expansion to show how it could work? I know some of the concerns had been about having 7th grade or 12-year-olds and like 18-year-olds in the same building or on the same campus. So how that study would work, how the buildings would be split up.
So that will be part of the redesign process this fall. In 2021, each of the schools has additional resources to be able to begin the research and the planning for the middle school within their high school and what that's going to look like in terms of the articulation of both academic and also just the physical space and how you would serve middle schoolers in the building. Both of those buildings are rather large, so there is opportunity to have separate campuses for the middle and the upper schools. And then I assume, because of what we're learning about remote learning and what we're learning about other aspects of opportunities and expanding access to advanced courses, that we will have mixed grade levels in some of those courses. But I think for homerooms and advisories and the basic academic key work that's going to happen for building foundation, at least for a couple years until we get to the higher level of rigor, we'll have pretty formally, middle schools that will just be within the high schools.
Okay. And we'll talk about the lot later at another hearing. I think it's a little bit too granular, but thank you.
Well, we were working on the lot, and so I think that that's tied up into zoning. And so, given they're not meeting regularly now due to COVID, I think that that's causing that delay.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Councillor Edwards. Now recognizing Councillor Baker. Baker, unmute yourself. There we go.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for coming here today, for being with us today. I'd like to echo, I thought Matt said it quite eloquently about, keeping this operation going. This is to you, Brenda, keeping this operation going and making sure that, there's something going on for our children during this crisis. So I just think you guys are doing a great job. And I just have a couple questions. And he also asked about the out of district special education. How much of that is trade schools? Is any of that trade schools?
We have a separate. The number we mentioned earlier did not include any of the trade school budgets. We do have a budget set aside for students who are enrolled in vocational ed programs that we do not offer. Almost all of that money at this point goes to Norfolk Agricultural Tech for their agriculture programs that we don't offer in the city. And the number has decreased over the last several years, which is good. For next year, we're projecting around $800,000 just for the program. And I'm not sure if the counselor's still here, but I did get the circuit breaker numbers. We get about a 75% reimbursement for costs over about 5 times the state average. So that number for FY20 was $45,488. So essentially, for those students who are outplaced, the state reimburses us about 75% of the cost for every dollar spent over 45,000.
So you said that it was 800,000. Is that just with who we send to Norfolk Aggie? And is that all we do? Just Norfolk Aggie?
I think there are still one or two school students at Minuteman and some of the other regionals. As we've done a good job of expanding our programming here in Boston, you're only eligible to go out if you're going out to a program that we don't offer. And so there are less programs out there that aren't offered at BPS, either through Madison Park or a number of the other sites we have now.
David, can I get a list of what those programs are? Well, you know, who,
yeah.
not who, but what the classes are at Minuteman and any place else, if possible.
Not a problem.
Yeah, on slide 31, where the investment is on paras for K2, it's less likely to be low-income students that are in that K2. So what is the plan for recruiting the low-income students to fill those seats? Because I think that is a valuable time in a child's life.
I think it's not about recruiting K2 students as much as it is about retention in upper elementary grades and the shift in the way that our district works in enrollment patterns. And so with universal kindergarten and a guaranteed access to kindergarten, we reach a number of students. Throughout the elementary years, we lose students at different points. And so when you look demographically at our district, you see shifts in the percentage of low income, percentage of students of color by grade. Part of our K-6 strategy, 7 to 12 strategy, is to increase retention and to disrupt some of those patterns that we think will make a more appealing district from just a purely enrollment perspective, and make us more competitive against the 5 to 12 charter schools and the 7 through 12 private and parochial schools in our district. So it's not about not having low-income students in K2. It's about losing higher income students later in elementary school.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Is there any discussion around, or have all the discussions around, like, I'm thinking about the Dever School, and then the lot next door. Are those discussions still happening at all with you guys, or is that something that's totally off everyone's radar and get back at it next year?
So the Devers School is in receivership with the DESE currently, and I think you're talking about the partnership that and the RFP that's out for the field house. So
yeah. So yeah. But both. Isn't there a plan? Isn't there a building plan for the Dever also? Is that affected at all by the COVID?
Yeah. So there's not a building plan for the Dever. Outside of maybe
the McCormick, I'm sorry, the McCormick.
Yeah, McCormick, yes. The McCormick and BCLA is still on the Build PPS, but there have not been any decisions. We've kind of not suspended it, but because we've been responding to COVID, we were going to have a Build PPS update, but we haven't been able to have any of that community engagement. So we just reconvened our team last week at looking at Build PPS again and how we restart those conversations in a virtual world so that we can have community engagement that's meaningful. Although I find that this is really this new Zoom has allowed us to have virtual meetings in a way that hasn't before, that has broadened, I think, our opportunity to engage with our community. However, our community that doesn't have access is then shut out. And so we've got to try to figure out how to balance that so that we can still move forward with some of the Build PPS decisions that I think are strategic in nature to us achieving our ultimate goals of stabilizing enrollment and stabilizing our funding.
Okay, so that was the McCormick, and what about the field house next to it? Are those discussions stalled also, or is that still moving at all?
Well, at this point, we haven't moved on it simply because we're still responding to COVID. And I'm not certain where the RFP is. I'm not certain if Rob Consalvo is still on the call now, but we could certainly address it to you and get back to you on that.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you so much, Councillor Baker. Superintendent and Nate and David, is it accurate to say you're all going to be on for the hearing that we're meant to be starting at 1? Are you all joining us for that?
It would be nice to be able to have just a slight bio break and.
Yes. No. That's exactly what I was about to say, is that I just wanted to confirm for counselors who may still, be on who are still here in the chamber, the virtual chamber, and eagerly awaiting a second round of questions, that since we have the same set of panelists appearing in the afternoon hearing, my proposal would be for us to break for 15 minutes and then reconvene for the afternoon hearing at 1:15, if that seems reasonable to people, rather than try to do another round of questions now. All right, I'm seeing thumbs up from the people who are giving visual cues. So I think I'm really grateful. That's a straight 3 hours of question and answer that we just did. And I know this is a marathon process, but I think it just really speaks to the degree of council engagement and interest in our schools and appreciation for the work that you all are doing. So with that, I don't see anyone waiting in the public testimony waiting room. So I am gonna gavel this hearing to a close, and then at 1:15 we'll reconvene. I also just wanna give general dispensation to anybody who wants to bring their lunch to the afternoon hearing. I think everyone should feel very free to do so, although you don't need my permission. So thank you all.
Madam Chair, is the sign-in still the same, or should you suggest we just mute and stop video and leave it running in the background?
No, there will actually be a different link, which as soon as we finish this one, Carrie Jordan from our team can send out.
Great.
For purposes of public testimony, et cetera, there's a different link that's noticed with each of the public notices. So, so we will take a break and then reconvene and focus in particular on school budgets this afternoon. Thank you so much. This meeting is adjourned.